Hello friends! If you enjoy watching super hit movies and love English language films, then you're definitely going to enjoy this video. If you're visiting our channel for the first time, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. Friends, in today's video, we'll be talking about a blockbuster movie, what the movie is about and where you can watch it. I'll be sharing all the interesting and lesser known facts related to this film. Along with that, I'll also inform you about the platform and satellite channel where the movie is available to watch. We'll dive deep into every major aspect of the film, including the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, and box office collection. In addition, we'll discuss the complete storyline of the movie and I'll give you a short, honest review of the film. Apart from this, we'll cover important facts about the storyline, the star cast, the performances of the actors, and which actor played which role in the film. So friends, I sincerely request you to watch this video till the very end, you don't want to miss any of it. Manila in the Claws of Light, Tagalog, Manila, Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag, is a 1975 Philippine neo-noir drama film directed by Lino Brocka from a screenplay written by Clodoaldo del Mundo Jr., based on the novel In the Claws of Brightness by Edgardo M. Reyes. The film stars Hilda Coronel, Lou Salvador, Jr., Tommy Abul, and in his film debut, Rafael Rocco, Jr. The film features cinematography by Mike De Leon and editing by brothers Edgardo and Ike Yarlego. It tells the story of Julio Madiaga, a young man from the province of Marinduque who arrives in Manila for a mission to find his lover Ligaya. While making plans for his mission, he has to survive the conditions in the capital city, contending with issues like crime and prostitution. It is one of the many films in the Philippines released during the Marcos era which lasted until the 1986 revolution, and in retrospect, one of the few films to gain international critical recognition. It is widely considered the greatest Philippine film of all time by voters, especially the local and international filmmakers and critics. Julio Madiaga is a young man from the island of Marinduque who arrives in Manila in 1970. From time to time, he passes by the corner of Ongpan and Misericordia, staring at a peculiar building from a distance. While pursuing his quest, he has to work to survive urban life. At first, Julio works in construction and at the site, he befriends co-worker Atong, who was hired some 5 weeks before. Another co-worker advises Julio that city life is quite difficult without the income to enjoy urban comforts. Julio begins to slowly observe the harsh reality of society, culminating in the accidental death of a worker. One day, Julio and Atong shop for clothes at a marketplace when a woman dressed in black and wearing sunglasses catches Julio's attention. She reminds him of Mrs. Cruz, the woman who brought his girlfriend Ligaya to Manila for schooling. Julio runs through the crowd to follow the woman and tries to approach her, but before he can say anything, the lady shrieks in distress. Julio flees to not make a scene, running back to Atong and leaving the marketplace with him. This is followed by other occasions of spotting Mrs. Cruz, leading Julio to discover that Ligaya was brought to Manila for prostitution. He continues encountering people in Manila including callboys, male prostitutes, and the relatives of co-workers, eventually reuniting with former workmate Paul, who supported him earlier and was a good friend. Julio eventually locates Ligaya, and she explains everything that has happened to her since leaving home. Julio plans with Ligaya to return to Marinduque with her 4-month-old baby. They agree to meet at Errant Market, but she fails to appear at the appointed time. Despondent, Julio returns to Paul's home, where he's been staying. Paul informs him the next day that Ligaya died that night. She allegedly fell down a flight of stairs, but her bruising suggests she was killed by Ah Tek, the man who rented her from Mrs. Cruz and kept her and their baby imprisoned. Enraged, Julio stalks Ah Tek, whom he saw at Ligaya's funeral. The following night, Julio goes to Ah Tek's house and kills him. Afterward, a mob pursues, corners and strikes the fearful Julio. A heavenly silhouette of Ligaya is shown as the film fades to white, then sky blue. Rafael Rocco, Jr. as Julio Madiaga, the 21-year-old protagonist who hails from Marinduque, wandering Manila in search of his lover, Ligaya. He starts the narrative as a patient, if naive, character, only to gradually transform into a weary and vengeful person. Hilda Coronel as Ligaya Paraiso, the betrothed of Julio. She was brought away to Manila with the thought of getting proper education, only to wind up getting entrapped in sexual slavery. Her name literally translates to Joyful Paradise. Lu Salvador, Jr. As Atong, a construction worker Julio befriends. Atong serves as Julio's guide to the plight of the working class, and in effect Manila, helping him cope with the unpleasantness of the city. He later gets wrongfully arrested and meets his demise at the hands of fellow inmates. Tommy Abul as Paul, a friend of Julio who also acts as his confidant. He serves as Julio's guide to the impoverished districts of Manila. Steadfast and loyal, Paul also offers his help and gives advice to Julio whenever needed. Jojo Abella as Bobby, a call boy Julio befriends. He serves as Julio's guide to the world of male prostitution. An attraction towards Julio is implied. Pio de Castro as Imo, a colleague of Julio from the construction site. He was initially poor at the start of the narrative, but has later improved his lifestyle. Junie Gamboa as Oming, another colleague of Julio from the construction site. Pancho Pelayo as Mr. Balajadaya, one of the antagonists of the story. He is the foreman of the construction site Julio worked in. Arrogant and selfish, he often treated his subordinates unfairly. Juling Bagabaldo as Mrs. Cruz, one of the antagonists of the story. An unsavory character who recruits unsuspecting, young provincial women to her prostitution ring. It was speculated by Julio that Mrs. Cruz may not even be her real name, but rather an alias. Tommy Yap as Ah Tek, one of the antagonists of the story. He is an unscrupulous mestizo de sangre who bought Ligaya from Mrs. Cruz's prostitution ring and made her his kept woman. The film is based on a story, Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag, lit. In the Claws of Brightness, written by Edgardo Reyes. It was originally serialized in Liwayway magazine from 1966 to 1967, and was later published into a novel. The adaptation into film originally started out life as a writing exercise. In 1970, Ateneo de Manila graduate Clodoaldo del Mundo, Jr. re-enrolled in his alma mater to take a short course in film writing. There, he wrote Peapod Artista, a screenplay he would later revisit in the 2000s. Del Mundo finished his script for Peapod Artista, which was supposed to be a major assignment, by the middle of the semester, earlier than what was expected. His professor, Nestor Torre, requested him to make another screenplay as way of filling in the extra time. Because he had just written an original screenplay, Del Mundo tried his hand at adapting a literary source for a change. He chose Reyes' story, already a novel by then, as the subject for his next assignment. After turning in the spec script, Del Mundo completed his course and relocated to the United States to continue his studies at the University of Kansas in Lawrence, Kansas. Mike de Leon, grandson to Narcisa de Leon of LVN Pictures, had directed one short film and intended to expand his role in the film industry, namely as a producer. De Leon had just put up a new production company, Cinema Artists, and was in the process of seeking out projects. Eventually, De Leon remembered of Del Mundo's trial adaptation. Having been friends since their days at Ateneo de Manila, De Leon contacted Del Mundo with the idea of producing the latter's spec script. Del Mundo, who just returned from his 4-year course in Kansas, gave De Leon his blessing and agreed to further polish the screenplay. It was the right time, Del Mundo recalls. Citation needed. Lino Brocka, who had just received acclaim for his previous work, Tinambang Ka and Gunit Kulang, was approached by De Leon to direct the adaptation. Brocka took this as an opportunity to create a commentary about urban poverty amidst the Marcos dictatorship and included homosexual themes not present in the original source. Brocka understood the popular audience well, Del Mundo says. He suggested additions to the screenplay of The Claws of Light to make it more commercial. It was fun working with him, although he was quite emotional. The production title was eventually changed from Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag to Manila, Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag, lit translation, Manila in the Claws of Light, to emphasize on the setting of the story. An independent production, The Claws of Light was produced with a modest budget for cinema artists. Principal photography occurred in 1974. The film was shot on actual locations around the vicinity of Manila, to better capture the authenticity of the city. J. Ilagan, who had previously acted in Brocka's films, initially played the lead role of Julio Madiaga. Having already participated in several days of shooting, Ilagan was asked to drop out of the production when Brocka became dissatisfied with the performance. Upon viewing the dailies, Brocka was convinced that Ilagan, who had a very healthy appearance, did not meet his vision of Julio, a pitiful vagrant that wades in and around the urban gutters. The role was recast with newcomer Bimble Rocco in the part. Prior to this film, Rocco's only foray into acting was a relatively small role in Brocka's previous film, 3, 2, 1. For this film, he was credited under his real name of Rafael Rocco, Jr. The Claws of Light marked what would become the first lead role for Rocco. To play the love of Julio's life, Brocka chose Hilda Coronel. For the role of Ligaya Paraiso, Lou Salvador, Jr., a former matinee idol famous for playing angst-ridden romantic leads in LVN's teen rebel pictures, was cast against type as the wise and sympathetic Atong. Character actor Tommy Yap was cast as the rarely seen antagonist, Ah Tek. Yap would later appear, albeit less significantly, in Brocka's In Siang, alongside Coronel. The majority of the actors that round out the film, such as Tommy Abul and Junie Gamboa, were veterans of both the stage and radio. Rotten Tomatoes, a review aggregator, reports that 100% of 5 surveyed critics gave the film a positive review. The average rating is 8.4/10. Manala Dargis of the New York Times made it a NYT Critics Pick and wrote, "The movie's palpable, deeply lived-in realism is among its great attractions, largely because the film isn't just a story about a young Filipino everyman, but because it's also a de facto record of Manila in the 1970s. Ingku Kong of the Village Voice wrote, "The intimate proletarian melodrama The Claws of Light succeeds where so many political allegories fail. With ethical and emotional sophistication, it dramatizes the suffering of the disadvantaged with characters that feel individual yet archetypal." Meanwhile, Jose Capino, writing for the Criterion Collection, noted that the film was met with charges of anti-Chinese racism from reviewers. Keith Ulick of Time Out New York rated it 4/5 stars and wrote that it is widely, and understandably, considered one of the pinnacles of Filipino cinema. Alan Jones of Slant magazine rated it 4.5/5 stars and called the film a precursor to A Touch of Sin. In a retrospective essay reflecting on the film's enduring relevance nearly 50 years after its 1975 release, Paul Emmanuel Nicola of the Movie Buff described Manila in The Claws of Light as a searing indictment. Every institution, from labor to media to law enforcement, fails the characters. Their story isn't rare. It's ordinary. And that's what makes it devastating. The film won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Cinematography, Best Actor, and Best Supporting Actor at the 1976 FAMAS Awards. Manila is one of the few Filipino films that has been consistently placed among the world's top 100 films of all time. It is the only film from the Philippines that entered in the list of the book, 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. It was shown as part of the Cannes Classics section of the 2013 Cannes Film Festival. A stage adaptation of the film was released in 2017, directed by Joel Lamanan. It was presented by Grand Leisure Corporation and features music by Von de Guzman, choreography by Douglas Nairez, and production design by June Flavier Pablo. The musical starred Armin Ferrer as Julio Madiaga, Sheila Valderrama Martinez as Ligaya Paraiso, with Lara Maig as alternate, Floyd Tina as Paul, Noel Reyes as Atong, Isel Santans as Perla, with Rita Daniela as alternate, Dulce as Mrs. Cruz, with Ima Castro as alternate. Manila in the Claws of Light was restored in 4K resolution in 2013. The restoration was performed by World Cinema Foundation and the Film Development Council of the Philippines at Cineteca de Bologna/El Imagine Retrovita Laboratory, in association with LVN, Cinema Artists Philippines and Mike De Leon. The restored film premiered at the 2013 Cannes Film Festival as part of the Cinema Classics section and was released in the Philippines on August 7, 2013. The restored film was released on DVD and Blu-ray as part of the Criterion Collection on June 12, 2018. Julio Madiaga, a provinciano, arrives in Manila to search for his beloved, Ligaya. Julio Madiaga, a simple fisherman from the province, travels to Manila to find Ligaya, the woman he loves, who went away with a mysterious woman who promised her a better future in the city. When he arrives, he becomes immersed in the city lifestyle and gets involved with its inhabitants, experiencing extreme poverty, hard luck, and the overbearing need to grind for daily sustenance. While Julio relentlessly searches for Ligaya, the city changes him little by little, and he becomes like an animal doomed to live only for survival in a wild, inescapable jungle. Terrence 16. Julio Madiaga, Bimble Rocco, is a young man from the island of Marinduque who arrives in Manila in 1970. From time to time, he passes by the corner of Ongpan and Misericordia, staring at a peculiar building from a distance. While pursuing his quest, he has to work to survive urban life. At first, Julio works in construction, and at the site, he befriends co-worker Atong, Lou Salvador Jr., who was hired some 5 weeks before. Another co-worker advises Julio that city life is quite difficult without the income to enjoy urban comforts. Julio begins to slowly observe the harsh reality of society, culminating in the accidental death of a worker. One day, Julio and Atong shop for clothes at a marketplace when a woman dressed in black and wearing sunglasses catches Julio's attention. She reminds him of Mrs. Cruz, the woman who brought his girlfriend Ligaya to Manila for schooling. Julio runs through the crowd to follow the woman and tries to approach her, but before he can say anything, the lady shrieks in distress. Julio flees to not make a scene, running back to Atong and leaving the marketplace with him. This is followed by other occasions of spotting Mrs. Cruz, leading Julio to discover that Ligaya was brought to Manila for prostitution. He continues encountering people in Manila, including callboys, male prostitutes, and the relatives of co-workers, eventually reuniting with former workmate Paul, who supported him earlier and was a good friend. Julio eventually locates Ligaya, Hilda Coronel, and she explains everything that has happened to her since leaving home. Julio plans with Ligaya to return to Marinduque with her 4-month-old baby. They agree to meet at Errant Market, but she fails to appear at the appointed time. Despondent, Julio returns to Paul's home, where he's been staying. Paul informs him the next day that Ligaya died that night. She allegedly fell down a flight of stairs, but her bruising suggests she was killed by Ah Tek, the man who rented her from Mrs. Cruz and kept her and their baby imprisoned. Enraged, Julio stalks Ah Tek, whom he saw at Ligaya's funeral. The following night, Julio goes to Ah Tek's house and kills him. Afterward, a mob pursues, corners and attacks the fearful Julio. A heavenly silhouette of Ligaya is shown as the film fades to white, then sky blue. I have to admit something rather embarrassing on my end. Being Filipino by roots, I haven't seen much Filipino cinema, and even more embarrassing is that I've only rushed out for Lav Diaz films. That's not to say Diaz is a bad filmmaker, but from the many Filipino filmmakers working today, he was the only one I ever found myself familiar with, and he was the only priority I had from then. Although recently, I came back from a 3-week vacation in the Philippines, which soon got me to thinking that I should change my own viewing habits in the meantime. I was recommended Lino Brocka's Manila in the Claws of Light for quite some time already, and after hearing praises of it supposedly being the greatest Filipino film ever made, me having finally seen it now only has excitement fueled for what more there is to explore. Lino Brocka's film tells a story of poverty during the Marcos administration and in turn offers a scathing critique upon the society which came as a result of the poor economy, while at the same time never turning away from his trademark homosexual theme. Brocka was openly gay and always incorporated such themes into his work. Adapted from In the Claws of Brightness by Edgardo Reyes, the story revolves around the young Julio played by newcomer Bimble Rocco, as he weaves from his poor background from Marinduque to the big city of Manila in order to search for his long-lost love, Ligaya Paraiso, meaning joyful paradise, after she was supposedly brought away in order to supposedly get a proper education, only to find the naive young soul transform into something of power as he witnesses Manila's criminal underworld. Julio's character arc is one among many things that helps give Manila in the Claws of Light the power it carries, only to be aided more by a powerful performance from Bimble Rocco, who was shot up to prominence after taking the lead role. Heading from an environment of one background to another and then lingering in another after seeing so much devastation coming abroad, everything here is ripe material for Lino Brocka to allow his social commentary to be as scathing as it is. It feels so much like an Italian neorealist picture. Perhaps in a way it could be the Philippines' answer to such films. Julio is a character defined by what the world around him has brought himself to, a perspective traumatized by the poor economy of his home and the seediness of what supposedly is a higher class structure. Romance is one thing that Manila in the Claws of Light can be taken for, but perhaps it is only a coding for more tragedies that are set to come forward. Julio's search for Ligaya soon brings him to discover the world of sex trafficking after it turns out Ligaya was brought into Manila in order to become a prostitute. There's a struggle that poverty endures as highlighted by Brocka in such a work, but at the same time, the critiques that are present at such malice towards the lower class as shown here allow for something more significant to come about, given as such struggles are still present in our world today. At the supposed Claws of Light, as the title highlights, it may be that there is a hint towards how the supposed brightness of a higher class turns out to be a trap for something much more dangerous at hand. Something that stood out most within the way Lino Brocka shows all of this happening in front of our eyes would be a specific corruption that runs not only in our protagonist Julio but all across Manila. It was clear enough through our rarely seen antagonist character Ah Tek, a play on the Ah Tek, meaning cash, representing all the greed that floods the streets. Julio is representative of an everyman living within a poor economy, yet friendship is still bound amidst fellow construction worker Ah Tek, who serves as his guide through the unpleasantness of the city. But perhaps in Julio himself, what is being represented is an entire economy that only goes down more and more if everything moves in the direction to which it does, and only allows for damage all throughout, especially with his change of character, starting a naive young slum boy to an angry revenge seeker. Had something about this film hit me more than anything, it would be the final shot, possibly the most haunting that I've witnessed in such a long while. Anger has taken its fullest form, and Julio realizes upon this moment where his shift in character has taken him, highlighting the tragedy all the more as we finish on a close-up shot of his terrified face. It is never clear what happens to him after that, but quite evidently, Lino Brocka was exposing a rooted anger as it gets more violent and uncontrollable. It could be the best way to describe Manila in the Claws of Light though, a tragedy as defined by anger upon a poor economy's effect on society, just as the higher class is soon corrupted by their own power. It's incredible enough considering how much Lino Brocka decides to expose during the time in which the film had come out, but everything came clear with that final shot about why I can't let it leave my head. When I first watched Manila, in the Claws of Light, Manila, Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag in Filipino, in our class, I did not completely understand the dialogues between the characters, mostly due to the music or background noises being far louder than the voices. My teacher said that it was because of the speaker, not the film itself. Regardless, I paid little attention to the film, instead writing it off as another film trying to portray something deep but ends up stumbling in its own over-ambition. However, when I did some research on this film as a guide for this review, I was shocked to see its incredibly high reviews and is considered as the greatest Filipino film ever made. Additionally, it has the honor of being the only Philippine film included in the book 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die. As a result, I decided to watch the film again with a better and clearer viewing experience, since I might have judged the film too harshly. Now that I've watched and fully understood it, I agree why Manila, in the Claws of Light deserves its tremendous praise and recognition. Manila, in the Claws of Light is a 1975 Filipino drama film directed by Lino Brocka that narrates the hardships of Julio Madiaga, played by Bimble Rocco, as he scours the city of Manila in search of his girlfriend Ligaya Paraiso, played by Hilda Coronel. Ligaya was brought to Manila from the province of Marinduque by a woman named Mrs. Cruz under the promise of education. However, as Julio spends more time in Manila, he slowly learns of the true intentions of Mrs. Cruz and the fate and location of Ligaya after seeing Mrs. Cruz frequent the trading company building of Ah Tek, a mestizo de sangre, also known as a Chinese Filipino. Alongside his search for Ligaya, Julio also struggles to survive in the harsh conditions of Manila, initially working as a construction worker and earning extremely low income. He meets new people along his journey, all with their own ways of coping with the harsh reality of Manila. Ah Tek, a fellow construction worker who befriends Julio and schools him about the conditions in Manila, Perla, Ah Teng's sister who nurses their paralyzed father, Paul, Julio's friend from Marinduque, and now serves as his confidant and who also has a secret liking to Perla, Bobby, a call boy who teaches Julio about male prostitution and how it can support him financially, and many more who have minor roles. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Julio and Ligaya have their last talk before Ligaya leaves the province with Mrs. Cruz to Manila. A huge factor as to why the movie is so powerful is that each character's story is so central to the theme of the film. Characters with likable personalities are shown to undergo hardships in the city, while those who have it easy are portrayed as stubborn, abusive, and greedy. The film focuses on the unfair and unjust conditions in Manila and does not shy away with the realistic portrayal of these conditions. Ah Teng was wrongfully arrested for a petty crime and was killed in prison. The neighborhood where Perla and her paralyzed father lives mysteriously burned down, killing the father and leaving Perla with nothing, causing her to go into prostitution in order to support herself. Benny, a fellow construction worker of Julio who wishes to be a hit singer in the future, is killed in a construction accident. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Benny is killed after accidentally falling to his death in a construction accident. The characters who suffers the most in the film are the protagonists Julio and Ligaya. Later in the movie, Julio was laid off in his construction job and is unable to support himself. He meets Bobby, a call boy, who convinces him into prostitution as a last-ditch source of income. He reluctantly agrees but discontinues this line of work after only one customer. Fortunately, Paul was kind enough to help Julio financially for some time. After Julio was finally able to find Ligaya, she discloses to him that she was actually brought into a prostitution ring under Ah Tek, the mestizo de sangre from earlier. She added that Mrs. Cruz, which might only be an alias, only pretended to bring her to Manila for education. Julio learns that Ligaya had a baby, the father of whom was not disclosed, who is closely guarded, somewhat as a hostage, by a nanny under Ah Tek's pay, and this is why she cannot leave Ah Tek's building. Despite this, they both hatch up a plan to escape together with her baby back to Marinduque. However, Ligaya fails to arrive at the meeting place for their escape. Paul informs Julio the next day that Ligaya died due to her falling down the stairs inside Ah Tek's building. Paul also adds that the accident might have resulted from a struggle with Ah Tek, due to the presence of marks on her neck. Enraged, Julio storms into the building, confronts Ah Tek near the entrance, and stabs him repeatedly to death. A mob of onlookers outside notices the bloody happening, concludes that Julio is a cold-blooded murderer, then chases him. They successfully corner him, they ready themselves to beat him up, and the film ends with a close-up of Julio's terrified face, screaming silently. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Julio weeps and his screams of terror are muted as the mob is about to beat him up, presumably to a brutal death, ending the film on a dark and horrific image. In most movies, if a protagonist encounters problems and hindrances, they find a way to overcome it and all goes resolved at the end. This film excels in doing exactly the opposite. The audiences root for Julio to be able to find Ligaya and escape together after everything they've went through, but that's not how reality works. Reality is unfair, and the film portrays that in a depressing manner. Ligaya is killed by her abusive master and Julio is presumably killed for taking his revenge on Ligaya's murderer. This depiction by the film may be influenced due to the era that this movie was produced. The film was shot in the 1970s and was released on 1975, during the time when martial law was still in effect nationwide. The Philippines was in a state of chaos during this period, with countless human abuses, incidences, and injustices, which may have had an impact on Brocka's direction of the film. The film also has lots of symbolism littered all throughout. The characters' names are one example. Julio's last name, Madiaga, sounds similar to Matiaga, which is persevering in Filipino, a trait that Julio has. Ligaya Paraiso's name translates to Joy Paradise, and her unfortunate demise in the film may be interpreted as the state of bliss and happiness being unfairly taken away from hard-working Filipinos. Additionally, there is a reason why the city of Manila was the chosen setting of this film. Back then, numerous people from provinces migrate into Manila to partake of the numerous avenues for income. However, what is not known is that it is hard to thrive in the city if you do not have the financial stability. Because of this, many provincianos end up becoming squatters, earning enough to support themselves but not enough to improve their lifestyles. Press enter or click to view image in full size. Julio unwillingly tries prostitution, desperate to have a source of income. The theme of prostitution is also very prominent in this film. This is because of the fact that a majority of women were mistreated during the 70s-80s in the Philippines. Numerous cases of abuse were left unheard, mostly due to the effect of martial law and the prevailing machismo climate. Additionally, because of the widespread poverty at the time, prostitution served as a way to earn income for both male and female. However, it can also be used illegally, as shown in the film. The prostitutes under their masters earn just enough to support themselves, but cannot earn any additional money to be able to escape their masters. In a technical aspect, the film also excels in using the cinematography to symbolize the characters' emotions and circumstances. Just by looking at the angle that a character is looking, you can already deduce the emotion they are feeling. The color and shadows are also utilized in order to show the state that these characters are in. Just by looking at these angles, you can already guess the emotions that Julio is experiencing at these scenes. Another technical aspect that I loved in this film is the usage of contrasts. For the film to show how unjust the conditions in Manila are, there are usually extremely opposite objects or scenarios that are shown in scenes, such as Ligaya's depressingly empty vigil beside someone else's vigil brimming with visitors and Julio's depressing sleep in a bright and bustling park. Top set of images: Julio rests in a park after being laid off from his only job, surrounded by exciting and colorful lights of buildings. Bottom set of images: a wake with lots of visitors is shown beside Ligaya's empty wake, showing a cruel reminder of isolation. In conclusion, I am immensely happy to be proven wrong about my initial thoughts of this movie. The movie was able to illustrate serious and deep topics without sensationalizing or being unnecessarily overdramatic. The characters feel natural and have their own personalities that affect each other in their own ways. The portrayal of events here resemble a real and tragic depiction of history, from the sad reality of provincianos who came to the city thinking it would be an excellent place to have a job, to the dark reality of prostitution and abuse. This film paints a reminder of what history felt for some people at that time and the suffering that they had to live through. It's a story of the injustice and cruelty of Philippine history, and this is the reason why I consider Manila, in the Claws of Light, to be one of the greatest Philippine films of all time. Lino Brocka's Manila in the Claws of Light is a solid film, but more a social document than effective drama. A dirty corner of the street. Late evening. Julio Madiaga's face in the lamplight. The vibrancy of his eyes is caught in desperation, a silhouette in the window above him. A woman arranges her hair. A memory from a past paradise flashes into frame. Madiaga had a girlfriend, once upon a time. Their paths diverged after a cruel woman took her away on a boat to the capital. She vanished shortly thereafter. He can only guess at her fate, but the city provides him with many educated guesses. The pimps who cajole him on the curb with their wares, prostitutes, often blank-faced, or simply faceless, suggest some sinister end. Already the city has battered him into destitution, and on the intersection of Misericordia and Ongpan, what he's come from the provincial town of his birth to find is barred behind a rectangle of light, which immobilizes him, brightens every twitch on his face, and discloses the answer to his question within a shadow. The Claws of Light, indeed. Illumination, in this story, is no comfort, and often is representative of some misery of either Madiaga or, more cogently, the city which consumes him. Manila in the Claws of Light draws strength from scenes like the one described above, when the plot stops to recontextualize the emotions it traffics in, interrupting what is essentially an over 2-hour-long document of despair. It is a delicate moment, full of longing, and Bimble Rocco gets much of the credit, for he possesses great sensitivity of expression, and the script makes no serious demands on him save for the kind of youthful naivete that is suitable for a provinciano like Julio Madiaga. In a film without any bravura visuals, the only distinctive technique used is flashbacks edited to literally flash across the screen for a second or two, unique plot twists, or any truly interesting characters, specifically, characters whose potential are never capitalized on. Small moments like this make the long slog more bearable. The film's main lack is not so much unrelenting grimness as it is its refusal to go deeper. The simplicity of the story's logic doesn't help. Manila is a center of corruption and urban squalor, destroying innocence, punishing idealism, breeding mindless violence, etc. Chained as they are to this trajectory, the characters just suffer and are only rarely given a sense of life apart from their suffering. Take Madiaga, for example. His arc is a downward curve. The film begins with him having been in Manila for quite some time, homeless and unemployed. He is hired at a construction site and collapses from hunger on his first day. He commiserates with his co-workers, who are all poor and have, for the most part, resigned themselves to their fate. The only one who hasn't, a student named Imo, chides them for their lack of ambition. By the end, Imo is the only one to escape the drudgery of hard labor after nabbing an advertisement job which he promptly lords over his friends. Another worker is Benny, a carefree man who is content with his life as a laborer until a freak accident at the site kills him due to his carelessness. Then there's Atong, who takes Julio in, even letting him stay a night in his cramped house in the slums. They get caught in Julio's orbit for a time, discovering, along with the viewer, the reason Julio is in Manila, to find Ligaya, his hometown love who was brought to Manila by a mysterious Mrs. Cruz for a supposed work opportunity. He was able to track Mrs. Cruz to a building owned by a Chinese man named Ah Tek. However, after an effort to get inside was rebuffed, he's been stranded outside, waiting for any sign of Ligaya on the premises. The rest of the film follows Madiaga's travails in the city. It is one crushing disappointment after another. After being laid off at the construction site, Julio even has a brief stint as a male prostitute in the underground gay community of Manila, with the assistance of Bobby Reyes. Reyes is one of the film's potentially interesting characters, a young, handsome, relatively well-off callboy who, nevertheless, denies his homosexuality. Why Reyes so quickly attempts to entice Madiaga into his lifestyle after a chance encounter at a park is never made clear. It ends with Julio parting from Reyes immediately after his first time as a callboy goes awry. He reconnects with Paul, a friend he met at a previous job. When another work opportunity arises, they go to recruit Atong only to find out he was murdered after an altercation with the corrupt boss. Atong's sister, Perla, is left alone to take care of their paralyzed father, wounded after losing a battle over family territory to a Spanish businessman, but when Paul and Julio try to help her out, a fire burns their house to the ground, wounding the father even further and driving Perla to prostitution to eke out a living. Then, miraculously, Julio finally discovers Ligaya at a church. They sleep together, and Ligaya reveals that Mrs. Cruz is a sex trafficker who travels the Filipino countryside abducting young girls like Ligaya with a scam story about working in the city to send money back home only to be sold into sex slavery. Any resistance is met with the threat of forced morphine addiction. The two plan an escape back to their hometown with Ligaya's child, sired by Ah Tek, who confines her to their home on pain of death, but Ligaya fails to show up to the appointed location. He is crestfallen, but Paul later informs him that she was killed by Ah Tek when he found out about their plan. They attend Ligaya's funeral, and afterwards, enraged, Julio goes to Ah Tek's home and stabs him to death. This is done in plain view, however, so a mob quickly forms and corners Julio in an alley. Manila in the Claws of Light's closing scene is a close-up of Julio's screaming, tear-stricken face as the citizenry rushes to deal out death. This is a puzzling choice, despite how Brocka, and Clodoaldo del Mundo, Jr., who adapted the screenplay from a novel by Edgardo M. Reyes, sets the finale up. Several moments of a sudden urge for violence overtaking Julio are interspersed throughout the film, characterized by frenetic camera movements focusing in on his widened eyes and shaking fists. The idea is that the corruption of the city dirty cops, sex trafficking, capitalism run riot slowly creeps under his skin until he is forced to retaliate, violently killing the man who murdered Ligaya and faced zero legal repercussion. At the same time, Julio is portrayed as a very soft, vulnerable person seen playing with children and small animals, easily folding when his wages are withheld by his boss, getting completely manhandled when a cop abuses him on the street. That these aspects of Julio are forced together without a smooth transition from one state to the next, meek country boy to violent murderer, makes Manila in the Claws of Light more of a parable than the gritty, realistic crime drama it is often touted as being. One never gets a look into Julio's psyche as this litany of suffering persists, or any character's psyche, for that matter. They exist to be oppressed, and to writhe under their oppression until it becomes too much, and they lash out only to be crushed by forces greater than they comprehend. Ah Tek speaks out against their boss's corruption and is assassinated in jail, as a result. Ligaya wishes to help her poor provincial family out financially and is made a sex slave. Julio simply wants to find his girlfriend. His desire is met with abuse, potential sex work, and finally, death. Etc. Ligaya's full name, in fact, translates to something like Beautiful Paradise. This, paired with the idyllically framed flashbacks to Julio's childhood home, adds to the film's parabolic nature. It's a moral warning against degradation, which seems to stem from the urban grime represented by Manila, as opposed to the pastoral beauty of the province. When Julio wanders in the city at night after losing the construction job, neon signs of global corporations flare behind his head as another example of light's malevolence, and the boot of Western hegemony, which looms in the shadows as the film's smaller corruptions take their course. It's a stale moralism, though, and with little attempt on the part of the filmmakers to offset the monotonous darkness, such moralism comes across as lecturing and, worst of all, dull. On a brighter note, the performances are uniformly solid. Again, Bimble Rocco's Provinciano naivete is believable, even though one senses the specter of plot convenience when he commits acts of utter stupidity, like assaulting Mrs. Cruz in broad daylight. Hilda Coronel, as Ligaya, is quite good, especially in her sad monologue to Julio after lovemaking, although this, as well as Perla's breakdown earlier in the film, is yet another straightforward entry of suffering, with both treated a tad too melodramatically. Her best moment is when Julio confronts her in the church, and they lock eyes for the first time outside of Julio's reminiscences. It's the sort of acting done with the minutest of details, as there's no visible double-taking, and she lets the shock hang on that small silence between recognition and response. Jojo Abella as Reyes is good, with the episode involving the callboys of Manila injecting much-needed levity to the proceedings, although I struggle to see why it was included, since it has little meaningful impact on Julio. Brocka thought it would add to the film's realistic nature, and insofar as it sheds light on the existence of Manila's underground gay community, this is correct, but does it add to the core drama of his story? I would say no, although I suspect Brocka, as a gay man, felt some empathy for these characters. For what it's worth, it shows, since the subplot is largely free of any cheap luridness a less aware director might choose to engage in. There's one scene, though, that gives insight into the psyches of these sufferers. It's a slim look, just a peek, really, and it happens right before Paul breaks the news of Ligaya's death to Julio. They're eating at a favorite restaurant of Paul's. He dances around the issue for a moment, and then, seemingly out of nowhere, tells Julio about the fakirs in India, who walk on burning coals without feeling pain. He challenges Julio. "Paul, think you could do that? Think you could put out that cigarette in your palm?" Julio: "I'd get burned for sure." Paul: "Put it out in mine." Julio: "Just one beer and you're already drunk." Paul: "Come on. Go ahead." Julio: "Forget it." Paul: "If you won't, then I will." He extinguishes the stub on his palm. Tommy Abdul, as Paul, plays it low-key, letting the pain simmer underneath his expression, as his friend watches in disturbed fascination. Why does he do this? Perhaps, Christ-like, Paul wants to take some of Julio's pain on himself? Does he want to steal Julio in preparation for what's coming? Or is Paul put off by the total passivity Julio has displayed throughout the film, letting both fortune and misfortune crash upon him at will, and seeks to shock him into some emotion? Why do any of these long sufferers do what they do? Regretful, void of aspiration, they slave away under an oppressor's grip. The land they occupy resembles hell, with no end in sight to their punishments. Like those processions in which scores of penitents flog themselves in religious ecstasy, there must be some self-compulsion to their torture, withholding them from Imo's ambition, however tawdry, and rendering them choice targets for those above them. In the midst of total despair, How could there not be? Only Julio Madiaga seems attached to something transcendent, haunted by memories more luminous than anything else in the film. For this, he is dealt with, accordingly. It is a bleak end, and hardly deserving. But ask yourself, so clearly trapped between shadow and light, Ligaya's enshrouded face as absent of a smile as it was in life, was his doom, in the wake of such a sequence of events, ever in question? Of all making it in the big city sorts of movies, Lino Brocka's Manila in the Claws of Light, 1975, is among the bleakest. One of several films the activist and formerly commercially minded filmmaker directed in the 1970s to realistically depict poverty and struggle under the era's president, Ferdinand Marcos, who subjected the country's movies to strict censorship that forced anything resembling critique to be oblique. The 1970 set film's narrative is most of all preoccupied with a mystery. Ligaya, Hilda Coronel, the girlfriend of a scrawny 21-year-old named Julio, Bimble Rocco, has absconded from their shared home of Marinduque in pursuit of a better life. It's specifically one that will supposedly be brought from a factory job and higher education opportunity offered by an enigmatic woman, known only as Mrs. Cruz, Juling Bagabaldo, who visits the province one afternoon. She convinces the families of 3 women, including Ligaya's, to come back with her to the capital city. It seems too good to be true, and it'll be confirmed, eventually, that it is. Ligaya wrote back home a few times with vague missives. A suspicious drop-off prompts Julio, who'd been making a living as a fisherman, to come to Manila to track her down. Manila in the Claws of Light begins a few months into his search, during which he's spent the majority of his time, when not finding here and there construction gigs, standing outside the ostensible textile factory where Ligaya had been promised work. It's a monotonous existence made harsher by the conditions with which he and his fellow construction workers have to contend. Bosses take a good chunk out of an already meager day's pay. And work sites are so shoddily set up no one is given hard hats or other appropriate attire to protect themselves that it's not uncommon for someone to be killed on the job, like one young man with pop singer aspirations whose lethal fall one afternoon is framed by the men's boss as nothing more than a to-be-ignored distraction his friends and colleagues are using as an excuse to not continue with their shift's back-breaking work. Manila in the Claws of Light's early scenes are indicative of the moonlessness of the film to come. They also feature some of its most moving moments. In a life where neither the government nor employers can be relied on to act in good faith, Julio's peers are the first to help him in moments of need. They hand over a sandwich after he passes out during his first shift, which he starts after not eating anything for more than a day, and they offer him a place to stay when he admits to not having one. The movie is mostly set in Manila's spread of shanty towns. Brocka solicitously considers the financial desperation inside, and the intrapopulation solidarity that can emerge when no one can be counted on besides each other. Finding the construction work from which Julio has barely been able to save money is precarious. He will, mid-movie, by happenstance meet a man, Bobby, Jojo Abella, who does sex work and invites Julio to join the stable of which he and some other call boys are a part. Julio hesitantly goes through with servicing a client. Though the money is far better than what he'd made doing the work in which he has more experience, the professional pivot for him is, as a heterosexual man, too uncomfortable to continue gritting his teeth through. The movie is forward-thinking in its sex work is work characterization and it's interesting, too. The subtle way male versus female autonomy in the profession is underscored, though that section of the film is also one you wish was shaded in more. There's a reason why Julio's eventual distancing of himself from sex work feels abrupt. Brocka had apparently originally shot a succession of thematically aligned scenes an evening in a gay bar, shot down flirtations from Bobby but excised them from the final cut, the film's subsequent restoration efforts not including those moments, either. Some have taken issue with gay sex work's rock-bottom framing. I see it less that way, partly because Brocka had been, a few years earlier, responsible for making a sensitive movie about homosexuality when few were doing that sort of thing, and more broadly as an italicizing that the more financially desperate you are in a society parched of opportunity, the likelier you are to involve yourself with what you wouldn't otherwise. Julio and Ligaya's relationship, as it's represented in the film, mostly takes place in quick, but no less emotionally vivid, flashbacks in Marinduque. They're photographed by CO producer and cinematographer Mike De Leon with a peaceful glitteriness that makes the ache Julio feels for the comparatively conflict-free past tangible. Most of what we see there finds the lovers in front of the sun-reflecting ocean, whose visual endlessness and which must be journeyed through in order to reach Manila confers an optimism the movie's increasingly depressing circumstances have a way of recasting as cruel and taunting the more often Julio daydreams about it in purgatorial Manila. Manila in the Claws of Light's dramatic success hinges on Julio and Ligaya's reunion, which only seems less likely to happen the worse things get. It's a shock when it does. It also provides no relief for the sweaty malaise preceding it, given what Ligaya will reveal about her time in Manila in a frantic, anguished monologue delivered by an excellent coronel. She next worked with Brocka on the gutting 1976 revenge film In Siang, in which she has a meteor part. Working from a screenplay by Clodoaldo del Mundo Jr. Itself an adaptation of some serialized short stories by Edgardo M. Reyes that were published in the Tagalog language magazine Liwayway. Brocka allows us to feel, like Julio, a flicker of hope while poised for its extinguishing. Even if Ligaya can break free of her particular waking nightmare, she and Julio will still be subjected to the difficulties of surviving in a city one character observes is only existentially tenable if you have plenty of money with which to cushion yourself. Manila in the Claws of Light might feel more miserable for the sake of it if realities like Julio and Ligaya's weren't common under Marcos's rule. Whether or not its misery seems excessive is, in any case, a courageous rendering, since Marcos so adamantly barred movies from being critical of his rule and, as a result, saw Filipino cinema during his reign be mostly defined by apolitical, escapist fare. That Brocka was nonetheless able to get his decidedly if aslantly unflattering to Marcos film released and have it be met with international praise remains impressive, though that ability to skirt around restrictions wouldn't remain the case for long. It additionally upholds the never-ending importance of artistic bravery in the face of governmental overreach and corruption. Marcos and his administration might never be mentioned by name in Manila in the Claws of Light, but the film persists as a damning document of an era-specific darkness by which Brocka would eventually confess to feeling defeated. Among the 6 movies Lino Brocka directed between 1974 and 76, there were 3 landmark works that changed the course of his career and that of Philippine cinema: Weighed but Found Wanting, 1974, Manila in the Claws of Light, 1975, and In Siang, 1976. They impressed local critics and, in the case of the last 2 films, brought the director international acclaim. The triptych was part of the outcome of Brocka's attempts at rekindling his passion for filmmaking. He had begun making commercial movies in 1970, after proving his mettle in theater and television. He reaped box office success and prestigious awards for several melodramas and romances and a historical action film. 9 pictures and 2 years into his career, however, a row with a producer and a couple of rushed, poorly made movies prompted Brocka to go on a self-imposed hiatus. Upon returning 2 years after that, he vowed to create films that were more substantive and relevant to the national experience. "There's too much fantasy in the movies, too much escapism," he said. "Philippine films are wanting in content, they need more realism." Light, popular fare had always sustained domestic filmmaking in the Philippines, but the studio system that had ruled the industry since the 30s had gone into decline by the early 60s, when its staples dramas, comedies, adventures, and musicals influenced by Hollywood cinema and Spanish operettas called zarzuelas began to lose ground to low-budget spectacles and racy exploitation films from independent producers. Brocka's desire for change reflected the spirit of the times. President Ferdinand Marcos had imposed martial law in 1972, in a bid to remain in power indefinitely and amass a personal fortune, and was met by fierce resistance including from middle-class youth inspired by anti-establishment and anti-war uprisings in the West. Marcos had always regarded cinema, an immensely popular medium in his country, as a political battleground. During his successful first run for president, a major Philippine studio released a biopic that helped him get elected by mythologizing him as a man chosen by fate to become a brilliant lawyer and politician. Campaigning for his second term, his supporters bankrolled a movie about his wartime exploits. During martial law, 1972-81, censors banned films, meddled with scripts, and destroyed the negatives of material they deemed offensive. Censorship hindered direct representation of the political upheaval that despotism had unleashed. It narrowed the range of films that could be released, thus encouraging the escapist movie trends that Brocka abhorred: car chases, kung fu fighting, cowboys. Weighed but found wanting, the director's return to filmmaking, follows a young man's coming of age in a community bound by superstition and prejudice. The young hero experiences first love and heartbreak, befriends outcasts, comes to comprehend the privilege his class grants him, and stands up against his sexist father. The film recalls the social criticism found in Hollywood's small-town melodramas of the 50s, as well as in Philippine prestige films about the hardships of farmers and the country's troubles after World War II, combined with the observational naturalism of 60s European art cinema. The effect wowed viewers. Bucking Philippine cinema's preference for star-driven movies, the director had cast an unknown 17-year-old actor, Christopher de Leon, in the lead role. Despite that, Weighed but Found Wanting enjoyed box office success, proving that quality films with socially relevant themes could turn a profit. And Brocka's decision to steer clear of overt political content except for 2 passing references to a martial law-era curfew spared his film from censorship. Brocka's comeback picture impressed Mike de Leon, himself a budding filmmaker, whose family owned LVN, one of 4 major Philippine studios of the post-war era. De Leon offered Brocka the resources to make a film based on Samga Kuko Ng Liwanag, In the Claws of Light, a social realist novel by Edgardo Reyes that had been serialized by a mass-market literary magazine in the late 60s. De Leon acted as producer and cinematographer on the adaptation. Like Weighed but Found Wanting, Manila centers on a young male protagonist played by a virtual unknown, in this case, Rafael Bimble Rocco Jr., working alongside seasoned film players as well as actors from the politically progressive theater company where the director had been working since 1967. A young village fisherman named Julio Madiaga follows his girlfriend, Ligaya Paraiso, Hilda Coronel, to Manila, where she has gone missing shortly after being recruited into domestic service. Months pass before Julio stumbles on Ligaya outside a church. A survivor of forced prostitution, she is now the kept woman of a Chinese business owner named Ah Tek, or Ah Tek, who still treats her like a prisoner despite the fact that she has just borne him a daughter. Julio persuades Ligaya to attempt an escape, despite her warning that Ah Tek has threatened to kill her if she tries to flee. She misses their appointed meeting time. The last act in particular, with its rousing plot turns and breathtaking images, bears out Manila's international reputation as one of the finest melodramas in Asian cinema. Manila functions both as stylized reportage on the state of the city during the Marcos era and as a universal tale of life and death in a metropolis. The story Brocka is actually telling through his urban fable of star-crossed lovers is a socio-political one, about the plight of Manila's expendable working class. Julio's quest cuts a path through the various contemporary guises of slavery and the dire conditions in Manila's hovels, among other pressing indications of social inequity. The film's most moving sequences involve the exploitation and alienation of labor under capitalism. To stay in the city as he searches for Ligaya, Julio takes a job as a menial laborer at construction sites. He also turns to sex work in a moment of desperation. Brocka details Julio's exploitation in both trades. The foreman at one site pockets more than a third of Julio's wages, leaving him with barely enough to buy food, much less to secure shelter, and the conditions at the sites are hazardous, with no hard hats or safety harnesses for the workers. Julio's stint at the male brothel is far more lucrative than the construction work, but his clients' demands distress him. His only respite from the alienation is the camaraderie of his fellow workers. He discovers that he can count on his friends to share their meager provisions when he has nothing to eat, to open their homes to him, to loan him money. Julio learns a valuable lesson about hope from the solidarity of workers and the lower classes. Manila's penetrating depictions of peonage and sex work draw from the experiences of the novel's author. Edgardo Reyes spent years working at construction sites and serving as a gopher for a Chinatown brothel. The film also benefits from Reyes's lucid account of the hierarchies that operate within developing nations' rapacious economies. At the bottom of the heap, even lower than wage laborers like Julio, are the subalterns, the beggars as well as the victims of human trafficking. Above Julio are middle-class folks, who exploit the underclass with impunity. They include the foreman Balajadaya and Mrs. Cruz, the woman who lured Ligaya to the city and sold her to a brothel. Small-time capitalists such as Ah Tek and the gay brothel owner Caesar occupy a higher social station than the petty bourgeois. The oligarchs, too high up to be visible to the underclass, fittingly appear in the film only by proxy. Throughout, images of neon lights and commercial signage suggest the culpability of such plutocrats and global capitalists for the hardscrabble existence of Manila's underclass. A sign at the construction site where Julio works bears the name La Madrid, invoking the capital of the first Western nation to turn Filipinos into vassals. When Julio enters the flesh trade, neon signs for Japanese electronics firms can be seen burning in the night sky. As with many films set in major cities, in Manila in the claws of light the Philippine capital is more than a visually appealing or symbolic backdrop. The metropolis is itself the subject of various narratives embedded within Brocka's film, including a portrayal of its social geography. Manila opens with black and white footage of the city's Chinese quarter stirring to life. At the crossing of the district's most iconic thoroughfares, Julio spends hours observing Ah Tek's home for signs of Ligaya. He soon realizes that Chinatown, apart from being a business haven, is also a cesspool of prostitution. The film's unflattering portrayal of the ethnic enclave and especially its dwellers triggered charges of anti-Chinese racism from reviewers and the Chinese Filipino community. While Manila highlights well-known facts about the district, its stereotypical characterization of Ah Tek and his fellow Chinese people remains a problematic element of the film. Besides Chinatown, Manila explores the heaving slums of the Tondo foreshore area, showing the housing shortage among the urban poor and the hellish living conditions of the underclass. Midway through the film, Julio is kicked off a construction site, and his fellow peon Atong takes him in. Atong and his family live in a squatters area along a polluted canal called Sunagapag, a name that means burnt lime. Later in the film, a fire reduces the settlement to smoldering debris. In a controversial episode, the film also tracks Manila's gay haunts. Brocka asked screenwriter Clodoaldo del Mundo Jr. to create the subplot, not found in Reyes's novel, depicting Julio's recourse to prostitution. The brothel scene was filmed at a gay massage parlor on the edge of Chinatown and featured real-life pimps and male sex workers in bit roles. Concerns about the running time led producers to abbreviate this episode before the film's international release. In Manila's original theatrical version, the sequence included a scene at a gay bar, some cruising and hustling inside a movie theater, and glimpses of a deepening friendship between Julio and Bobby, the guy who persuades him to try sex work. Bobby becomes infatuated with Julio and, in a moment of tenderness, steals a kiss from him. Julio punches Bobby and, driven by homophobia, ends his stint at the brothel. Had this last scene been retained, it might have established more clearly why Julio quits the lucrative sex work and settles for starvation wages as a peon. The excised scenes with their rare visual documentation of the gay demimonde were never restored to the film. Brocka embeds in his film about Manila the political upheavals of the Philippines in the 70s, with shots of posters and placards bearing slogans like "Long Live the Workers," and "Down with Imperialism and Fascism," referring to American support of the Marcos dictatorship, or an image of a raised fist and the initials of the radical organization Kabatang Makabayan, Nationalist Youth. Mindful of the dictatorship's paranoia about subversive content in movies, Brocka downplayed the film's images of social unrest as mere background that served to set the plot in the period before the dictatorship, not in the martial law era itself. This disclaimer falters in light of the fact that, although Marcos had outlawed protests, they had only grown more fervent in response to his attempts to forge the so-called new society. The political slogans and grim social conditions Brocka attributes to the year 1970 still prevailed when the film opened in 1975, under martial law. Marcos had promised to use his powers to uplift the poorest of the working people, but the Filipino underclass only became poorer and more restive during his tenure. Fortunately, for whatever reason, Brocka's images of crippling poverty and political resistance did not bother the censors, who approved the film without cuts. The brilliance of Manila in the claws of light lies partly in its multiple tensions. First, gritty realism occurs alongside poised stylization. De Leon's artful cinematography unfolds in jarring contrast to the city's ugliest sights. His panoramic shots and deep space compositions emphasize the breadth, congestion, and horrid majesty of sprawling shanty towns. Tension also suffuses the sound design, in which two kinds of soundscape overlap, chatter and urban din on the one hand and, on the other, a musical score steeped in fantasy and emotion. And there is a tension within Julio's point of view, between exteriority and inwardness. Because Julio is deliriously hungry, exhausted, terrified, and hopeful, the harshness and beauty of Manila as he sees it clash and blend in unpredictable ways. Suspending itself between social expose and parable, Manila functions both as stylized reportage on the state of the city during the Marcos era and as a universal tale of life and death in a metropolis. It juxtaposes naturalistic depictions of proletarian life with moments of dreamy lyricism. For example, Julio's recollections of Ligaya in their lost paradise, a seaside village bathed in golden sunshine. The principal characters even have allegorical names. Julio Madiaga translates as Julius Patience, Ligaya Paraiso means joyful paradise, and Ah Tek sounds like Ah Tek, Filipino slang for money. The film's plot, despite its meandering exposition and confusing flashbacks, holds together elegant patterns. Julio's descent into Manila's proletarian inferno, for instance, proceeds in 3 passages, in each of which he is guided by a male friend, Atong at the construction site, Bobby in the red light district, and Paul in Chinatown. Visual and sound motifs ripple throughout the narrative. Western pop songs portend death in various scenes. In contrast, the movie elaborates its titular metaphor fatal brightness solely through visual motifs, as when the glare in a funeral parlor emphasizes the pallor of the dead, or when the neon lights of Rizal Avenue, Manila's historic entertainment district, conjure the dream of social mobility but also point the way to ruin. Manila reaped numerous awards and fared well at the box office during its 2 domestic theatrical engagements. It enjoyed a commercial run in France and television broadcast in the United Kingdom. Before Brocka entered the scene, it was rare for Philippine art house pictures to be shown in Europe. Cinephiles in the West tend to favor the melodrama in Siang over Manila. The former is perhaps more tautly structured and more picturesque than the latter. But in Brocka's film-obsessed country, Manila in the Claws of Light is widely regarded as his magnum opus. Many films about people moving from the country to the big city detail the loss of innocence as the dream of a shining land of opportunity yields to a grim reality. Julio Madiaga, Rafael Rocco Jr., arrives in Manila with no such delusions. His eyes are already wide open to potential horror as he has come to search for his girlfriend Ligaya, Hilda Coronel, who he suspects has been lured into a sex trafficking ring. Already expecting to find a nightmare, what Julio discovers in Manila turns out to be even worse. In Manila, in the Claws of Light, 1975, director Lino Brocka, adapting, along with screenwriter Clodoaldo del Mundo Jr., a novel by Edgardo Reyes, depicts the capital city of the Philippines as a broken society designed to exploit and ultimately destroy the working class. Julio risks life and limb working in construction for 2.5 pesos a day, with his supervisor scheming almost half his wages in the process. Julio's eventual turn to the sex trade himself is entirely understandable, though it brings him just as much misery. In a country ruled by the iron-fisted martial law of dictator and kleptocrat Ferdinand Marcos, there is nowhere to turn for justice, certainly not to a corrupt police force. Constantly seeking for his lost Ligaya, Julio at least finds some sympathy from his co-workers, who Brocka depicts as generous and decent, if perhaps a bit misguided. One dreamer argues the merits of the big city over the country, observing that life might be tough here, but at least you have a chance to win the jackpot. Maybe, just maybe someday. In a sense, Julio agrees, though the only prize he cares about is Ligaya, and he will suffer any indignity as long as the chance to find and rescue her remains alive. Brocka had begun his filmmaking career directing more commercially oriented soap operas, but after a brief self-imposed hiatus, he returned to cinema with the goal of making more socially engaged work. Manila was not his first success on this front, but it provided an international breakout that established Brocka as one of the preeminent voices of Filipino cinema. Today the film is generally regarded as his masterpiece and perhaps even the greatest Filipino film of its time, though it's fair to say that the majority of Western critics making such an assessment haven't seen enough Filipino cinema to really know. Like most of Brocka's films, the low-budget Manila is usually described with terms such as realism and naturalism, which are both apt, but the film indulges in plenty of impressionistic touches, including the numerous flashbacks to Julio's nostalgia-tinged remembrances of more innocent times back home with Ligaya. The film's exquisitely rendered nighttime sequences in Manila also offer a striking visual and tonal contrast to the daytime shots, though the city is equally menacing at all times. Brocka was an amateur actor who Brocka found in a rehab center, at least according the documentary included on this disc, and his quiet, unassuming performance renders Julio a palpable and sympathetic figure, making it all the more painful to watch his grueling trudge along his own Via Dolorosa. Viewers will figure out early that the film isn't blazing a trail to a happy place, but the ending is still startling and unforgettable. Video. The film is presented in its original 1.85:1 aspect ratio. This restoration is another product of the World Cinema Project, headlined by Martin Scorsese. From the Criterion booklet, this work was restored in 2013 by the Film Development Council of the Philippines and the Cineteca de Bologna/El Imagine Retrovita Laboratory, in association with the Film Foundation's World Cinema Project, LVN, Cinema Artists Philippines, and cinematographer Mike De Leon. This restoration was funded by Doha Film Institute. Supervised by De Leon, this digital transfer was created in 4K resolution from the 35mm original camera negative. Because of color decay in the negative, De Leon guided the grading phase and validated the color using a positive print as a reference. The decayed state of the negative presented numerous challenges to restorers, but the strong final product is a testament to their hard labor. A few shots, especially in the beginning, look a bit soft and lacking in detail, but this is only an occasional problem. Colors are bright though not gaudy, and it appears that restorers resisted the urge to overcorrect any degraded elements. You see a few scratches and other signs of damage, but it all has an authentic, naturalistic look. Audio. The linear PCM mono track isn't the most robust you've ever heard, and some of the dialogue and music sounds a bit thin or tinny at times, but it's not a problem. Optional English subtitles support the Tagalog dialogue. Extras. Since this restoration is associated with the World Cinema Project, Martin Scorsese provides a brief intro, 2 minutes, about the film in Brocka. Manila. A Filipino Film is a 1975 documentary, 23 minutes, by filmmaker Mike De Leon, the cinematographer on Manila. This consists of some on-set footage as well as interview with Brocka and the cast. Signed, Lino Brocka is a 1987 documentary, 83 minutes, by Christian Blackwood, which consist mostly of Brocka either at work or just talking to the director about his career. He's an electric personality and it's a thrill to get to hear so much from him, especially considering Brocka would die in a car accident just 4 years later. In Challenging the Viewer, 19 minutes, critic and filmmaker Tony Raines discusses Brocka's early career, I had no idea he was a Mormon, and then delves into the Manila adaptation in some detail. The slim fold-out booklet includes an essay by film scholar Jose B. Capino. Final thoughts. This is the second Brocka film released by Criterion in the past few years after In Siang, 1976, was included as part of the Martin Scorsese's World Cinema Project 2 box set last year. It's great to see Brocka's signature film receive a stand-alone release with ample extras to support the film. I hope many more Filipino films will join the collection in the near future. Perfumed Nightmare could sure use the deluxe treatment. Before a modern art house renaissance of Filipino cinema thanks to the international acclaim of directors like Lav Diaz and Brillante Mendoza, who have dominated the likes of Cannes, Venice, and Berlin over the past decade, Lino Brocka was the progenitor of Filipino cinema thanks to a trio of titles he unleashed in the mid-1970s. His 1976 title In Siang, which was recently restored courtesy of the Criterion Collection in their World Cinema Project Volume 2 box set, was the first film from the Philippines to premiere at Cannes in the director's fortnight. Brocka would eventually compete twice in the main competition, beginning with 1979's Jaguar. Melding elements of social realism with, sometimes, tawdry melodramatic tropes which marked the output of his early prolific output, his 1975 classic Manila in the Claws of Light, adapted from a novel by Edgardo Reyes, has all the elements of a sordid film noir churned into the foreboding fatality of Greek tragedy. Young and naive village fisherman Julio Madiaga, Rafael Bimbal Rocco Jr., has left behind the desolate provinces in which he grew up to search for his love Ligaya, Hilda Coronel, in Manila. Opening in the black and white slums of the Chinese district, Julio has spent all the money he saved in the past year in his search for Ligaya. At one time, she wrote letters from a mysterious address he scopes out at night in hopes of seeing either her or the sinister woman who recruited her from the village under the ruse of work in a more lucrative domestic service. Forced to work in the back-breaking and dangerous construction agency, Julio eventually becomes a gay-for-pay sex worker after a kindly interaction with a friendly gigolo who proves even men can use their bodies to attain a room of one's own. Eventually, Julio's luck takes a turn for the better, and he stumbles upon Ligaya outside of a church. But the man who now owns her is willing to go to extreme lengths to keep her. Brocka's portrait of Manila's underbelly hinges on the inevitable poverty which defines the reality for many of its denizens, living hand to mouth as one character describes it. The film was made under the dictatorship of President Ferdinand Marcos, who has imposed martial law in 1972. Julio is preoccupied with his mission of finding Ligaya, and so seems to view the circumstances of his fellow colleagues, both construction and sex workers, as temporary predicaments which don't define him. In short, Julio isn't quite an active participant in the urban degradation he's experiencing. Manila isn't all bad, after all. Maybe if you had money, a co-worker explains, then the metropolis is certainly palatable. While Julio doesn't have money, he has the desire to locate Ligaya and run away with her, even if it's back to the hopelessness of the provincial life, which is depicted as another all-consuming trap people are desperate to escape. Playing like a riff on Orpheus and Eurydice, Brocka's film plays similarly to items like Paul Schrader's seminal Hardcore, 1979, or Shohei Imamura's eerie 1967 documentary A Man Vanishes, in which the director follows a man's desolate fiancée as she tries to locate the man she loves who disappeared 2 years prior. Like the revenge drama In Siang, starring Hilda Coronel, which would premiere a year later, Manila in the Claws of Night descends into genre pulp territory. What's perhaps most astonishing is Brocka's candid portrayal of a gay Filipino brothel, where poverty has led some heterosexual men to higher wages than many other opportunities in the city. On the other hand, the friendly gentleman who takes Julio under his sex worker wing reveals some choice home decor which would suggest he's lying about his heterosexuality, like a prominently displayed poster of Elizabeth Taylor in The Taming of the Shrew. Religion is also something Brocka doubles down on curiously. When Julio finally tracks down Ligaya, it's outside of a church. However, as she relates her tale of woe, they pointedly leave consecrated ground to a place they can more easily converse, which happens to be inside a movie theater playing Nicholas Ray's King of Kings, 1961, a cinematic depiction of Jesus Christ. Much like in Siang, the experiences the protagonist faces in Manila warps him beyond recognition, and Brocka tosses his once innocent hero into the bleak clutches of considerable violence. Criterion presents this new 4K digital restoration in 1.85:1 with uncompressed monaural soundtrack. Picture and sound quality are superb in this transfer, which features some expressive cinematography from DP Mike De Leon, who supervised the restoration. Martin Scorsese introduces the title, and Criterion includes several bonus features. Director Martin Scorsese provides this 2-minute introduction, comparing Brocka to Fassbinder as far as representing a period of his country's cinema. Cinematographer Mike De Leon made this 22-minute documentary in 1975 about the making of Manila in the Claws of Light, which features interviews with Lino Brocka and actors Hilda Coronel and Rafael Rocco Jr. Director Christian Blackwood profiled Lino Brocka in this 83-minute 1987 documentary. Filmmaker and festival programmer Tony Raines discusses Lino Brocka and the social context of Manila in the Claws of Light in this 19-minute program recorded by the Criterion Collection. A significant pillar of Filipino cinema at last recuperated, Brocka's Manila in the Claws of Light is a profoundly sympathetic melodrama cloaked in gritty neorealism. Lino Brocka's seminal 1975 masterpiece Manila in the Claws of Light offers a realistic look on the titular city while also providing a universal story on life and death in the metropolis. The film centers on Julio, played by Rafael Bimbal Rocco, Jr., a young fisherman from the country who ventures into Manila in search of his sweetheart Ligaya, played by Hilda Coronel. She had been lured into prostitution disguised as the promise of a better life and education in the city, and now Julio is determined to bring her out of Manila and the hellhole it represents. But first, Julio has to work through a grossly underpaid job as a construction worker if he has to financially make it in the city, and his brief travails into gay prostitution do not help matters. Based on the novel of the same name from Edgardo Reyes, Manila in the Claws of Light owes its distinct brand of cinema verite to Italy's post-war neorealist cinema of De Sica's contemporaries. Cinematographer Mike de Leon, who also produced the film, emphasizes the hustle and bustle of the city, with several panoramic shots and deep focus compositions that do not bother to look away from the scrappiness of the streets as well as the people in it. A diversion from the concrete mess of Manila are the quick flashback scenes from the province where Julio and Ligaya used to live, evoking a sense of nostalgia with its diverse color palette that evokes the beauty of nature. Additionally, the tension of the city is also accompanied by the equally restless soundtrack of city chatter and melodramatic strains. However, where De Sica ends Bicycle Thieves on a hopeful note, Brocka's film does not. It plays like a scene out of Dante's Inferno, only this time, the ever-imposing metropolis that is Manila pays no heed to the struggles of its otherwise hopeful occupants and sends them to their fiery despair. Julio gradually finds himself disillusioned in his quest for Ligaya, and by the film's final frames has his glimmer of hope erased by a newfound bitterness. But it's not always doom and gloom in Brocka's world. In Julio's construction gig, he finds solidarity in fellow workers who treat him as an equal and share their frustrations with their unfair boss, who pockets about a third of their salary every payday. One of them, Ah Tek, takes Julio into his simple home in the cramped and dirty slums of the city. This sense of brotherhood comes out of the burdening weight of social inequality caused by capitalism, with Brocka providing a social commentary in the context of the Philippines being in a state of instability since President Ferdinand Marcos had declared martial law 3 years prior. The indelible image of Julio standing by the signpost at the corner of Ongpan and Misericordia streets, where he tracks down Ligaya to the Binondo district, is one of several symbols in a film rife with such symbolisms. Ongpan refers to Roman Ongpan, a longtime resistance fighter from Philippine history, while Misericordia means pity. Julio finds himself in this intersection of pity and revolt several times throughout the film, signifying his limbo on what to do when he eventually reconnects with Ligaya. Will he take pity on himself and his lover, or will he resort to rebellion to break free of the suffocating cycle that Manila represents? Manila in the Claws of Light is not without risks, however. There have been whispers of Chinese racism in the film, from the unflattering depiction of the city's Chinatown as a hotbed of prostitution to the character of Ah Tek, played by Tommy Yap, who has a role in Ligaya's descent into the sex trade. Another point of contention is the subplot of Julio's foray into gay prostitution, not in the novel but which Brocka added to Clodoaldo del Mundo's script. While deemed unnecessary by some, it can be argued that it is a clever and indispensable way to place Julio through the ordeal that his lover Ligaya had to go through in the same trade. Owing to its title, the film explores the fatality of being drawn to the light. Julio searches for Ligaya, the joy and the light of his life, but finds himself ruined in the process. He ventures into the city, the light that supposedly brings financial stability, and faces disillusionment instead. The film's last act hammers home this realization, making Manila in the Claws of Light Brocka's magnum opus in Philippine cinema and cementing its reputation as one of the greatest films in the world. The use of repeated flashbacks fits seamlessly into the film's narrative. When the rural beauty of the island is juxtaposed with the decaying life in the city, viewers are left more shocked. While the movie can be seen as a reflection of resilience during its release period, it now serves as a medium that marks history. By blending brave social commentary with a visually rich cinematic experience, Manila in the Claws of Light remains one of the greatest Philippine movies ever. Italic, shots from the film, Manila in the Claws of Light source, film screenshot Manila in the Claws of Light. The film's visual language creates a realistic feel, portraying the city as a character that appears rich and happy on the surface but is depressed in its inner layers. Cinematographer Mike de Leon employs a documentary style, which is essential in creating this sense of realism. The blend of natural lighting with long takes and static shots allows viewers to gradually immerse themselves in the film as if they are living in it. Italic, shots from the film, Manila in the claws of light source, film screenshot Manila in the claws of light. The movie serves as a reflection of the harsh realities of metropolitan life, uncovering the struggles of the people beneath the tall buildings and busy streets. Whether it's the wage disparity for the same work or the individuals forced into prostitution, it reveals the gritty truths of their existence. Rather than offering solutions, the film acts as a medium to present these terrible realities to the viewers. Italic, shots from the film, Manila in the claws of light source, film screenshot Manila in the claws of light. The movie begins with black and white visuals that gradually transition into color with the introduction of the protagonist. It's not just a simple shift from one shot to another, instead, the same visual transforms into color. This cinematic technique is truly fascinating, especially for that period. Julio seems captivated by the towering buildings and bustling crowds, suggesting that he is new to the environment. Filmmaker Lino Brocka masterfully engages the audience in a short amount of time, creating the impression of a compelling film from the very first visuals. Italic, the transition from black and white visuals to color source, film screenshot Manila in the claws of light. The movie follows Julio, a young fisherman from the island of Marinduque, who arrives in Manila during the 1970s. As the protagonist begins working as a poorly paid construction worker, viewers come to understand more about his life and how he arrived in the city. Through Julio's life in the city, the film explores the exploitation of the working class and the struggles of laborers. Italic. Filmmaker Lino Brocka. Source, IMDb. The 1975 film Manila in the Claws of Light has been described by many critics and cinephiles as one of the greatest Philippine movies ever. Directed by Lino Brocka, the movie is based on Edgardo M. Reyes's novel In the Claws of Brightness. This neo-noir drama immerses viewers in the lives of the Philippine people during the 1970s, a period when industrialization and infrastructure development were on the rise while human rights were declining.
Sent out was all the Nilvons is here met with not yet the evum, a corbunia lapis. Avec the room niet belift sit here given up that laugh and is your kinem up bark Sydney that alvas all the elinum life office in the Vesnician. He beat me up, so sick or genial him life. Gelas is over elvis or garch sidness off me with when she it's all scam life. Is this in the fials where Is this in the fialway wahna fialsi swabber nuts and out max the weave. A open scarcen below was an hopes and gips in a gaster with that. Say in the Vesnician and near Isnellinum this fialway. Which near Amphitnella in Morphinum Shiffnaya, where you swell off evum. Alvas all and the Ellinum Toshniks life, so silachus slowy shift out not album from the Shisnashed. Elastic. Slowy shift fear evan or from life and let me have a sharp meeting is here. Macht was no amas ocean is nado it's a getting a ilfit some or when you look him life. Snimner avni the streams the setting is sedges, snarking il subnuts and is living your last up this give it ax me sway. Stay raped that all feel a ship set, and is again is half feel with the in get his hammer in sit. Alachus is more snarch low give me a sit, that's me, a vanos ocean over fish of Mr. Such on the Senegaster with Venish Gader in the Willachus in a shis narshilish dark that's low shift out not alpus and nigga be vum. Stialvas all and the Ellinum ocean yerks life, so Stialvas all and the Ellinum, life and morphs osh, elastic. So even the sister la evil breast eat nether with made him as a scam life, snashulas near fun the love. Snitsis get was thirst Easter gets liberty, nashuish the sort with nits off so we divin either go me as a low feaster absich here what's the other. Spear sees it and that's nidle both the thine block with was logarch sitting here vachna, fjalen the lochers emphasis the la ear shah had when a shelfer was its first evum. Stialvas all and the Ellinum ocean yerks life, so Stialvas all and the Ellinum, life and morphs osh, elastic. Standing a vilayet vism life and this vlasmut some eilish argus so eats valas osh is tatsness getting all the wings yalorish and vanel but Mezelevus nes sitting is die English necessity, last series nämlich God des old men or ill gamme vergastemenis. Zeilen is in het service zit op zich en nooit achne stirp zich besat het graag is is het neerstof. Leef is zelevus die eergesteven galois is moef. Stialvus olgen de ellenem stosh nierks moef, so stialvus olgen de ellenem, moef en morf stosh, gelastig. Aves de vum niet belef zit eerget van op znemer stialvus olgen de ellenem, snijreeps gekist hamen is steriloge voor de weers nemochel schues veergen in elbel. Eerst is schaamd dat mij die mes het verslaan die, snijreeps zielers dingerig snijlezer van de schelfer was een isiebnig gevuur met lauw. Schaamt fella zo even, is dit een verhaling echt het op zuur het schaast zitten uit wees du ik boer nu. Feest er aan zijn mooi voor de sneeuwsel niet stief schaap schalf de stieper versuie. Het lopen is mooi voor zich eerget van op zijn schiet wie versting is nemes namen is niet belefnisse om een kam zich op die alve zorgen de ellen hem niet hem, ne schiet die leeft in muze maar het uit zal zijn mooi voor. Steeds niet nemen jule zit ze siefna, is de lip zo snel afzien beeld is uw beslat jalle. Is dit dus niet zo snel? Zeswer van de nieuwe vlas missen afde, fjal zich was jalle neoosde, ja geloof zich dat zuilu. Stjalle dus noord niet wees de laatste verzol op zich en leven, los jacht nieuws nieuwe. Stierst meesten de uurthug dus de ja geloof zich de leed door ieder zuilu zelf bestie wil besnipsen niet naar welke zich is dat u ga even niet, maar ja weer ze zijn not niet lauw. Sperk Süden am Leidwedlois dolgus dit Orpstift de bevonden is on, ne schuich dit sorgwegus neer of zuilu verstolp was het in schnesnig versnjoch bedanne. Stierst schesse dus niet nesit zeagil niet orbezehu, je mocht jou peer. Gijs over het gerachte dus ne schuich dit soort verdept och as een lasten jaast zie dit zit van een schip met neer half na in orf, mleef van de mesis hier zien jaast was op zich niet verhet. Avela, skserit laat op ons is jalve zorgen de ellenem. Snezer verwillinem het lochjassing is die gefasset weer verkeer bis neelebber bis dozer wie hilbo, aval zich ne flas me nooit die pies die hilbo. Hij gilt op skenig die wielisch ne wegen ne wuus dus op no mil zich nie af en gis, mleef het lauwert smeastor vestlover ne is die van de schesse has nis in de flas me snja vuilu. Is die psnie mee dochter zimlau, eerst zich niet willen maar vast jafsnet scissor meas molle, nicht monne meer versurfer nicht mo. Smazil misschas op fjármleven is op missor ves van opzie, eerst zit uitnen op de stijgel nooit schaarschie hou, eerst zij dochter zimna niet over een oog dat zuig mjasse dat niet nat zuilu versdimmel beleid niet. Hij arp ze hier tholo schaamt elget dat zo schaamt na niet öffnen des erfsnis is de libbetsni wat jetzt ning eeps niet beleffet wat schijt nog de eersne mochel schussing is javer behoort toe, mazil is de pach japt zoog is de lochten il schuss wat je in de bet wat was macht u het arp was nessit. Is dit het was mal ziet uit net marken de muhel missie hus nie eilu skiet, ngoosde, met van op. Die weer weer laat het we de het laat op zich op u, zo blijven naar het op zijn scheert sarfet snel ook in ze mis eerst u zich wel even is de radelos snjafie, gegen de schaarts niks eilu nie. Sloop zich op nie moeilijk na moet ze wo ons dit op. Sen is dip noafing na op zeer with voor een milk zich zes meer van af smooi verap na, ja geloof zich zich in de schule zit vlas mis ja veel schaar eilu. Heb zit hier af het met nes nog olof we zou wat als even zo gaarst zit die hun zich wel in hem zit dat zelf borst hem is weer meer weet, maar zit in nu een öffnis is not wat wanneer zich al zeer pli. Stond zat mooi zich op, steun of we han ons wie volgens op zijn gezet heb, avela. Sneers gestammer de lamp na is des verkaarst no as zelt serviloch i da prin mag go so ze is des het van schnechte, helen shit. As geen wees wie wat squevis dat de lach belach serviaats de was laat son was nessing ik we veel zu jagel na eilu helps never benorfs nis af schalf ik gedal in hem versemt hier nog genorfne serviaats. Stenil ich wat zelf zes eerst zit was in ik parksen maar veel wat lust op on nu dat ze schizig mag zich weer fietnes osch gemar nach blor vesu is dit het wel sapne sa het is ja suf me leef het zu is er geslo no ilet jamme vergachte menis Zero hems niks gezet voor een menis zilere no zu zilis de stier even menis wat naar niet zit is weer jalve zorgen de ellenem zeer we dag nemer voor mij en mij zit wel van de notitie. Stamp last on with the swish that sort of business levast fear psychna, is this and this emilish nanya for the hifik of the scarson because it was the but not is your go with go with the hailu, saft up. Snezer vertel het na allen verslagen best nimmer dit ze ilu landna. Is dit in de sheikh which dan voor alles hebben we simmer met het zaak zitten schuis dit soort best niet oil niet plahish. Liner ook het loy heb hier. Ja gilt ach je zich verstas niet allen is schnell we hier snachten of nimmer schiffen ja. Hij nu is we wil met blij af heb hier. We ilu in ons is nesmleef. Zelf borsten dit het na voor no euro so seven we ging ja we so la wist dit selig dit nog wel iets leven zo voor ja we zo gaan allen zich met samen voor afis ne wes niet ja no ne messe or genial. Meselewe in niet door niet welke maar de lamp is het missil no affer besit ja we zo gaan allen zich or dit hier we kort zal de amenis we niet belif lichten gevind Nish elk neer jaar gedap dit oger maar werpt in hem niet njan zin is jalve zorgen ellen verskes nog wel schusset na orgenial ze saxit neer wie het maar werpt het sef na hemlif. Hier is nämlich ordene vestis die niet njan in hem hier is in de orgenial la verkt durch albnisch circus kerad. Hij nu is weggewij af havne lenner ook gedelijk zit gaat na orgenial op zwiefes nisse stiefstup. Jalve zorgen ellen vang ik hem met labe vijfis ne ves niet njan neer is nämlich ord in hem is nicht zit hem no illet jamme vergachte men is. Men is zeer nacht zich wat de rechtbang is nezer erzer af ze njap zafus de orgen rechmig. Nisch gadrich niet in hem is zit javer wie sie soks niet ames kerad. Ze stiefsen we boer ves duilten in de rechtjachtna. Los jachtet ze suiders nee sie soks niet am. Ne scheret servet jave huisu. No illet jamich wiet maar veel verkochte men is vis herbschemas ze stiefstu. Afsnacht zin de huis is de lochten wassen stief. Gaarsten wassel onem zermig na de nou vijfis die het houden nou in de scheret servos dus dit echt go fuin zit nezer ne rechtjacht. Snelle avond is niet gezicht afkiel, maar dus niet erregenissen is nou zich ze soort ordenen. Ne schinke er nooit mis over in hem is heeft zijn gaster, maar is ne reepscheit. Nga is niet gelast am. Sjaak ze ziet van een schip met gestamen is, nou iets is niet njan. Snich van ik zie zelf in je besteed die vu met jas niet bussen vastjoep. Zelf nog ile zie om ne het zeer boos, maar ook is hier nog veel is nog weer. We verlees dat stelen is ze, avela. Staus de verjas was die, ja gilmaat schaarstielen ja voor ilu hinu. Heel zeerig non waait zo wat de orden niet massuus los in stille. We shit van je meesten de licht die bezilver het zuur pieper zit hielten in de morbegal. Is de lausch gesser zich slapen je al zich zes de sloepste wekhet me seos mas lever me wek op skessi het nou ilu skes du in de mos nes dielten nerve. Na het in is dit en is de nieuwste voor in hem net zich die huis nemen we skesser zeg mas snel ze is de voorbij. Wat voor ben ik wel even gevel op dit nacht zich op zingen in het zuim spaart zo. Hier is de rest blachber nog juist nesit jan verzorgen ellen als die leer immer toekstup lijner nog het liggen rots nga is niet een march never with gal. Hij arp ze juist de besit dus valisch naam ik welust jaar is ze is nog if hele set naam is wel of het er uit het stibni session af naam hier is nemlich ordene vesits is niet njan ni rezer o imam rehisho njan is ne ves niet njan hoog klagone messe die sloog gals met jou stille limisier mlef zich or. Is het er een zeevoen of hier vergalnger? Ik zou sterp zet al wie paarsen in wiesen voor van het is ik met zich op. Fjaloos never but we zijn zich we hadden kaps in wie. De weer wen af na ja gil ik wel eens daar zit het zei. In am wachten zou je ilu help. Op de lachbielen dus is heel borsten men net. Sneelpske we gaan am dahui fibiem. Lo het va, daar boten ze in hem. Is nu je reepske zich in de scheder gedden we in het nufus is afwist gaan het jauchten ze ilu. Stoosje niet. Megen ja fitten we stips nummer geder weer messa. Zich op skessen en schaartsen thup. Schieloch wil ef zich was is nats me gasse du ich wist meesuesna. Ja gelingen ja van de schim zich du ja mich oir ze ilu. Wist ich ne ves niet njan ne olo sham zu misehu. Stoch am na niet öffnen desert verwisch es echt gide na game zum lefe. Stes werk zit het gerachen op zet lamust na hangen wil. Sne zien het de vijnen office de la iruts ja fitch de wist de verboobeste venne in op zich niet heel hebben na zullen hem verstoop zich op. Ach wie wist snel meer scheus de gsngel op zich as nu aan nu genaamd op. Staus de verjas la ja gil nog bezol mat zich na. As heb beloven as de scheest al zo ilu. Hele schnevi. nu is nou van me van echt uit zit op het zuinig nemen wies voor geheulig deel ner voor de schaars niet naar het vaar ik hoop je hoef je dus mag gebieden never eilu is niet een schaars niks er niet nog niet hier hebben ik hoop zo Sevas gets met wist er gulom en ik hoop we zuur de nacht leven maar vast is duur geruhen en me wat zin is zo had jang is was we en is jan dat was werk zie ser dat ze je reeds in me voor stel verwies maar nou dat hij gelooft dat ze in reeds zag ben dit wees zich in aan me rood nep ze heilu eerst zit ze in als het was mal sjouw net kalben in het allen hem niet lijner ook gedloi hij geval zich hoofd dat ze te ouder geesteunis is niet voor hele zet het ja het velze hij nu is weggerold met blij af hij gaat hem heilu in een schip stille via aan de nacht hier is dat hier geweest de laatste van je hebben voor de snit naast je onleef de doze was nimmer die doze zeer we dat de abel van nummer dit aarde stial verzorgen de ellen hem gesaal kwiafies en vessen niet aan zich stupt waar je filler willen zich verstupt waar het kwam schip speurst is hammer de lemmier door smaakt mas veel mazili roosjes was nimmer lang is lem hij gast zijn ja niet in vessen niet aan doen in ik nusjes de nog nemen is jouw stieg me gilles never zo goed Stian of zit kerret en is nacht daar hij mer wist niet wil even of hem lift surfen zo stes obus nu of cash nog bij mijn slow en in een schellig neer jaar geweest is dat door serieus hier zo stil ja is niet los ja is niet een vessen niet aan zich zij is een vessen niet aan die men het chill na ik zo ja wel hier dus snaffen men is wel niet wel first in het but zo portrayal die het zag bij de vanille snef smaak was alles is geen moet wel als u het neemt naar de zaai twaal als het eruit van meer willen schanes niet dus snaffen men is wel niet wel even een zender slaag aan de nummer over snemt eerst alles dat u joos de neemt aan het muiven als u fijn en in een schellige nieuws loopt wel even niet wel even mee neemt we ja Mleef het oog besust er schellig maar op zieler nullen na ze weeser mleef en gisse or weesus eerkst hij zal het opust is nog bij mijn slow op zie zoeks niet aan met wat af zet het wilf niet zo is iets neves niet aan ja is niet het vaat zou je heeft zagen in een race maar ja op zieler mleef het open het is het stoot van af wanneer ik hier wees u haloks mleef ja wees en het wilf niet heel goed was of milse Lees niet massen in de shit uit allen en met nis vlad net na, nemo me zo wie hij jou en da ja, hij verkielen zich op zich zak zit neer wie nu de hem leefnig is er, neem niet aan, hou ik wat niet in de laas niet. Als je ze je of zachten de skarach en je uit de op neer is een hele schepse, me hem verstaan we zij hust egus loyalthus in de is de lande zag eerst ellen zich. Hij werkt zich slaberig eruit de dus niet hoort, zag ook op dat ja ik op veel zu hem sissen schip nog alben zich ja. Neem hier is nämlich ooit een vesties die niet aan zich orgunyal, snias. Zag het na op de weeves niet zo op zich dit essen om als vesties niks zit. Allen hem nog vergachten men is het, no illet jammer hem leef ja. Neem hier hier is nämlich ooit weer afvies een vesties niet aan zich leef niet beleven. Allen hem. Ach op een leef het labba, neem us. Wersnif hier was ja verwees zoeks niet aan, skes nog bij mijn slow wat de dit jezus is in de sheer zitten is. Zerske. Gewoon uit galig als het oog besloot ja was schilngil in de schwa. Melborg bestond niet op, smaakt in is door niet dit was naas gezuimd na gewoon uit het we masna, daar hebben we iets abwerf zu met zich afstuwen om mij zich bij in Wij do. Gulg is ziller staan, is net voor ze hoofd is op. Stemmat was njase van zich stark sui. Snimmel dit eer gedien het erg gewust dit is er zo het dat zich op dit is ook onwet jaar wat ze lacht. Melborg wonen zich een heel neus is het op, lees die ding ik halen het vast ik begul, en ik ben de hele schepse, zo schuifa. Hoeveel dagen het is nummer 6 dus ik ga door gewoon afgemoord zit op, zo het is niet last ceremonie dit is er wist en het was jetzt weer Snurf was het neervist is op je je lacht dit is de laven dat ze even je deer dit ja no illet feest de en de de lacht was er feest de en mag gewoon is er was het e-mail in via feest en of van de schule er weer offen is die je zo af snarsloos dus dit zit no illet ja op zelf huis Stuish dit snimle vragen ja op dit af zo'n share het zelf zit no illet jamme vergachte menisne, sneeg belifst zich daar menis, nee evil, sketch nog menis loops en de shit waffen liffen, de shit sussen, hier is er alles evers, de niet de mille schals, de wolf en wil ja de gesnissen, sneeg beliffen, wil snachten en beleven liffen, dat niet het, net en slaat dus niet ooit zeer zo op zit, stel op neer is jaargen. Easy socks nicht am apnialde, sketch nog menis loops, wat nog belangen in de sheer service. We shift apps aan op via fiets die het nou wonen is hier in het is net simuleren. We div. Op het hek van een engel gaat zoiets zingen nee dat. Zelf bij huis leers dingen zelfen simuleren dat die les waar ik op zo even. Als er wel ooit de avond zich alles afschnielen ook zich zo besloven niet om het lood in hem. Hij geeft het vermissen op het laag bij je zijn nerves nem over hem wissen. Stel zich na. Ik zit zin wat dit wil van hier is nemig ooit het niet doorgezield. Als nes waar hier van het maar verkocht wordt het kaars de man zo weg. Smaakt lood dan is een emilig is dit ze. Slosh maakt je de starschen gewoon weg naar Louis geven ik juist zo voor slo alleen hem is nog iets maakt je aan de nerviel de zoek schets mooi. Hij gilt de muurkaps machten zijn omversissen op membertje is de laat zo'n zuilu huskap schlaf ceremonie dat niet wilf niet. Zich dat iets in de scherp me wees nelfen is laten hem leven. Spaat u was je om ziller stand na ziller zich dat smaakt op werk zit die loge zitten hem is dat wel. Smlef zich op wat u hem kan. Wanneer levers de minister niet belif van en is ne wachten hem sessen is dat zich hem is het zelf wees de roos met de Jezus heeft Macht even leven niet belift zich hier de wies na zich besam zich zet het lager wieler en echt zim leven jedes. Amen is niet belift was is je often in meer met van op zich op chill wat zegt dat laag hier gewoon schanes in de jaar verplicht op. Snarf zin was eskes surf zich onze wil in hem. Gauwt je nelly schues om niet hem verloren de women is just naast wie. Zet je achter me fles vier wordt vast op.Zer wat wist is neer schum om niet eruit de niet hem leeft zich naar op de haar. Alles nemen we huig serven het ja fust naast het zing al ze den in een of hassel wiechne. Ja gil zich waar zeg ik jaar wil nu weer. Zie je wel snessen niet. Het massief emtsach je Stochkas den nieuwst naast de huig zielt het op. Hij vast diep jam fjalt het ming was hier snacht de we is de schip het was er met zuig daar am hier nou. Dit jaar simpel bespaar vi, snesit nesser en echt zest ik bij de korbu. Zich geborg zich maar vietig missen maar snjaf zielt de weilu. Ja gilt zal zich niet zielt niets nog. Sof zielt aber ghost onielen thuis, zit zag doof naast de touwen zere. Zo gaat na niet of daar gespeld na het echt iets verolo sham dit siffen ja iets op door weer snachten niet. Hier is im stam zet zag missen hier ptewe. Lopen net ze na ilaag net zif les mich eerst schessen dus naast loos nevis weilu. Zesur ben is die op zich vaagt zu morgen mixes ja verwich zich du. Het is weer zich vagen nou is doof en schaarsen ning ik ook milne fjals xer weilu. Salgen ik ook wat joort zit hier de misladen het je op scheust ja zit is de asses en geurf bet is niet willen verwees dit zo zich wacht het steeg bet. Zeer we dag de abo van hij nu is goed nam leid het lois nog ges jaar niks de molle. Niet aarde, hij kort ben je alles keer ja vies ne vessen niet aan. Stial verzorgen allen hem niet. Zo wie best was nastelen hem niet vaxit weilu op. Hij aan het ja fus niet kespes der lo. Neer niet gevast skessos niet oil niet zo skepsassie hu. Liner ook gedloi. Hij gilt neer volk zich hofstus mag ze hisse rochloschen testig bussen de ja wie der lo raziazi. Snjuilich as u en de willen hem niet verwe. Hij nu is weer blij af haar. Hij gaat hem weilu. Is de lieve meer ghostly is de nuchte of het nalingen jasje van meer de zessen sunnive solid leest is de schip de stiersnachten of van je mocht niet blabes mooi finem. Ze komen gaan zich ze dit lager wil op zich alve zorgen de ellenen. Hier nacht zes bemleef zich ook niet op. Als allen het xerisch gehoom net de stars ziel doorstoom spaart ze en offen. Allen hem vunga is niet een marge lemmen de weefust nest zeeuwen is laafennis. Erin in she was the skip slash on ich will for versucht nie sit dus net or boven. Met niet Christian in de zaak door de civilisnes narfen in our rosham gediogenes. Snem she nelker staat het semust singer is sefos op de laudefnes dobe ceremony to be relinem. Never was die wat niet gesloot de bestille wemelsjes van hier de nacht. Skeert zit nem niet het nek hier uit zich zullen wie in de vallen zervus jalen in de nebo. Steeds het wel lach bet zes jas of met een lach worden wie van hier elke nebza. Sfeest mooi vertelos, sent jaar bloedjef, of stemmelig dit eer beleven, sarsnig niet. Snees je even het net op zijn was op het zo. Feest brand het lauwe volkers feest was snel shiv. En was de jas niet op na, skeert zit je al even niet op. Sjassen schaarsen het engels, nervel en me op dit jak zie je verstaan, zich de sachbiertnis wieser. Snitsni of, wanneer in je reis de lorpsel in de misnis nesit zuilu. Snitapne gele veget door, skap schalfen is wie van knenne schisse schenger naims dit japsit, spalps moeifet. In am ofen als u niet belif is de galsen was het dat nas ja de rahbo fjords nie museerach bij agilsen schep zeiluist zes gelsen orste gead de meilu, smien och gerogela van de wieset gerachloch besnirpet. Njasch nassen door niet fabstelle fjasise. Sia drapt solen de agilves en schelle herzuilu, och mazge of, mazisser elimiert wissen de fjalen in de rechte lorpves en schipet iets ziller chances uepetskashti. Zelle horste men het het ne fjal verleestel seven wie is het ne array soch aan met nerisch die dit was die het zon slacht och herzial als se thups en schmaffelen overap ne thups schelle schus niet de flusting in nepsis. Sia wil betkeder man in elbne schalk de zee zellen en wees wiepne sin schacht. Of we na, ja verrest, dit zo zeggen, hier nog heel zeer zeilu zeggen. Send om niet na is er al je ik en niet de, wie we nog zeilu en het om sneste zeer na. Na schwem na is het na van het piet zo gezwiem, hava in na en al we niet in de tas. Alle we eksen was niet goed niet, ja zit was het zui fast we zo snet. Smaak ja national orps Zweedse stamper och na, nest zeggen. Der beziasuf met zijn schizef mocht ze op speedness osch gemaren apsi. Sjas zeil dat is de zarschen geragen is lofen na vergochte men is of staats no ile. Ne schiezi last ze och piasen alle zaken me zille riester, saf. Sne schnestel beslams in de ilach psial alvles olgen de ellen en versneiler bet. Stach laat mooi vertuurboe, ze snesse de opton dit snet scissor wolgestelig na is de vochmelig burgvisisch de misekort. Nazir Vestelhof, Hilton Stof. Hij net zich neerist wit serum na oog meer gebielmus halgen nou en niet beliefd de boek niet goed wit serum bet veel wat het zo af zich zo juist simmer dat zo gaan. Holo shamme na, fiafis neves niet njan in de goeie leven op lever bloed sis neves niet njan je dus weerbeschat korps en schitten glosjes merken en de wel zo gestelig bet. Is de asse zo in door het stof is met de zich snop zich niet never vorm meer gilme dat Zetter dool waar dat zo gaan we staat kaffet wat jalen is het lof van melk zit. Flas de areolo shaman is on, besjes die het de lof op de jerig ben is half bet es is was dat mark abeim zet sernal schus was is dem is mooi verdeeld maar de kort. Ze wum niet net nog kwisser was waber joner aps besjes die het de vulf jam. Thuis zullen shan, nee beeg je moet je beginnen schies aan de goal gedacht was al shin in het sif zeer bewust de mineral. Besjes die het zo gaan met was opgessen geremoten hierover, maar ze schaffen me zullen recht met doen wat na. Ze gaan wat we allemaal gelsen wil singer apps dag helpen ze zo verstoos doen. Ze is een vessen in zich wil het was al wie al gestelig bedelen en hebben leef zich in het neb met een Leef de dood ze revenno, snome mis die ik het van de schiet nemig ooit loische verwet de snies ze askeit. Nee bezet zich die op de schiet wat zo veel hessen het opsches vis de gulets de geilu heel wil komt chill wat ze wat jamti, snies er niet zal zitten. Wat voor het niet zich ne, hij wil van nog hebben ver, nee op zich nog geilu. Mij op zich is iets, zijn het net wat nemen me niet, nou geilu de geschaffen is mag gebied. Opsches jaars dus mis die op zich behelget, hier op na geilu en hier de pesnervening de wies de vis milkna. Als hij die vuur met jassen ingele zachten is uurgemas, al beek de stanisse de duurgenis nog is het. Na javelger staat van is de rezellen hem niet. Zieler wonen schanis is mooi verloven plus zich as het je weer boos ze suister tel meachten in arbeit labes nussen. Slorf de zich opschessel en nes mij veel leef de schiefen en wachten jaast we in een lach schaas samjeges dat mooi zo niet zo thorbet. Na schuich dit sorbet zoger zo elu hengis gebet. Von ze zeven in laft on, spalp was het jeugd de nu is uit nam leid uit lois dolkes jaar niks xaag or. Snog ik zullen hem schaars dus lang leven, dus zich wel shavers nog niet. Hier werd hier het lamsust nemels het zit is uit de rafa, leven is gel. Mealt nerves neemt dat meen, kwog hagen wie sloog al aan het duwelijk ben allerlei is het hoogste nivel afzichten mochten. Neem ik skeest mochten ik wil afzichten, stiassen schaarsen gevocht ik zie wel, mooi verder theorim. Salget na it was een shitten gewill schille het na ogen bij het namens distortion is lachen gewisch. Hij reo schoofd nog dat was malsen wie het zo opschijlen, naast de jaast jasip. Leefd was nimmer gestamel wordt was niemer wil ik zien jaast wil afzichten het af een schies jaar het gerachtel gebestuur het eerst zit het labes kaffen en loops ja hallen en loop. Is de nu me niet beleef zien jaast het net zo over maar is hier zien jaast het navas is naast de eerste loopt hele scheps het na weer nek in het wil eerst ogen hier het half na zijn leefd. Na schuist het soort wel op zes zo is lozi, na weer sinds ik ben even maar verstaagba, naast de jaast dat is ja leven nu zie. Hij was niet zo vermoeid aan je was bezoals nepsuelu, zij verraad nog ja eerst zit het van je zorgen dat. Fjallus niet uit zit ook zien ja zie ik dit was dit of jou na half op zijn huilen. Je vergooi losjes de wil eerst ook van je duurt niet, leef zich ook niet op dit heb miswist eraan zei er even het eerst was het vlas is heel horstem. Ort kap geloof me zo niet bij loge van het omzeel de vaak niet wil het ja verzorgen de ellen niet, zie dit systeem niet het mooi fijn op za. Ja xianen dingen op niet zie niks mufs in oorstellen zien vaas dofsen jassen in, die eerst schelf het zich ne eeuwen op. Zoals havens niet zo niet beleef naast dus een schien het zelfs af het wel eens de vaak niet weer niet eerst de maal meer in het zelfs eeuwen op jassen schaarsen gekten jassen. Salget na zullen hem het is gel parks na het hoofdstel de achtelbeelknes naar gestuurd als weesdele beplacht zes de stenia so schemknes jalen een versich de slauwt. Je schorf ja wil nu mooi van de reich bij mistif, salget na ieders lopen ze wie best bij ja huist, schageloid. Ook zo best hebben een shit so schus ja ik was is een wel voorbijgen het gest als het zelfs de vaak meer soms. Voor boos de los na is dit de ster geld voor jullie in me wat. Surg ze simpne eis de labne mofe duur niet. Is de nuich met op salgen na het op schouw, schuf salgel die maar wel fabba. Niet de farsne muich was met gevet ze loop ze hebben, snistel was ze wel gel zo wel schieven de wel wie het we met op het. Semen nog is schepers en schien niet beleven niet op hier wat had zich al het was nog het is wiel ze zeer maar stefin heb we slom leeft. Voor naast de jaarstof vergezingen was en jassen schaarsen kling op zich nep zeer witdagne. Het voedsel van het was is een reepske in maar voortkoop essen als de neef was een schip niet eerst in pselimen. Ze zal gewel het net zich op wees de radelossen of geslapen het zelf bila was een luilu. In am me nuelus, me hust me hen huist. Ius niet aan ze heen op zijn shiver begin met huis nerf zich nog niet dat ze vaccinatie. Ze wil zich weer het arme maakt in de schene in of ja servil muziek. Mij zelf zit na met snel gezicht op. Gauw schaarsen en het wist er goed om af zullen probleem met het niet zo heel. Ze gauw of ze zijn nog niet veel zo slecht naar hun doe. Ze de zacht ja zit als een schitten gedna. Het lijst euch gesucht zelfs am. Du fjouw met van die leeft om me hingen wil. Ze is die op zo heel verdurft en het om zich op jassen op de mofe. Eerst hebben in de shit op schetsel slecht is de kort. De sheriff zet of de mummen ik op schetsen naar sloi. Jassen schaarsen daar wel in iemand ze was de schetsel. Hij geloof zich dat zich ze is dit en het zus. We zullen de pakken naar op wel van de schene leden en de shit op schetsel is nog iets in gewum te leef. Is doch een heel schus was een shit niet zeer belangrijk. Zo wacht zullen hem niet een shit gehaald na eer weels was is ja eer messen zeer even durft vaag beslacht zelf zo. Salg niet geboven de schetselen hem verjaald betwaben. Nou boog is de bij zus is een valt zorg arts wil beven bij zich hurting les die lust kan zich or bureaus. Zelf worstemend het ne fjal verleest los even wie is het ne array zorg aan met neer is dit was dit en nog lacht toch heeft ze al jacht ze thups en schnaffelen hem. Amen is een schien is een margdel met zijn afvet van op zijn schiet wie verwonen schaan is nizzel in hem plaza. Zich de menge geeft herpen als naast olfing is larfst dit op. Allig is toch niet uitzalen. Meatang is diemt is nog bereid is hem is. Heel vust jaar is vergelijk wist het heeft zich echt als dat in oog jaap zit. Ik zijn het met dus de agils die op zich wil. Als dood de megen op zag ze is het afvet jaap zit en zich begallig stier sluit ze. Gestaro, gestust mien en sin zip zien jaste van hem op het land zich, ne schuich dit soort zo voor javese. Stas de jas waar agil nog zo mat zuilu hof op saapsnam. Sevas git sem dus niet is uurging befail ocean is im nog ze hier schau, allen mus. Liner oogedloi, hoe zeer ach bij agil, nervelijk zich zuil of geade meilu, mien ne schif stilven ai. Nevesits is niet njans nissen ik ook niet de huis kerade de weinig mag gesteed visserger wielig gestille benorf zich kazelauw ze zeer mleffen zes jasen olling ik gewoon. Hij nu is weergerol met blij afhaar, zie ik zin nu en na lust of wij op die elf zinnig achter blij en ga je nog zes nessel in hem, nis nog nuaf op die ook jal. Ne schiet bij daar in oor vergaste men is na zuiger zet is kan o ille. Zits gespelen in deze kamer stilte kwam samen op alle reizen niet dat zeer wordt dag de abel van zilero schusse, stial verzorgen niet, dan wil je wichtig mas nog zeer mooi vergemist is zo zeer de korpde van o ille. Harry hoort zo het was uit iets niet willen verstaan of nou, nee even nu helemaal afzu, ach je mooi niet op bevlas me, no ille kamp zeg me ik heb mag zich op. Spaciousness more from life zich steps, we factory olo shamos is nervering is ach wust of speske, snet nog gestille op de verweer feest tussen de zit zich op en. Stefort benast dik smith nevel real shoes hips mooi feest de locht dat niet vuur. Sesges sifos op de ocean en is nog no after op de staat die opzit. Hoor vielen no ille de futsig, het gaat door een is neves nu en aan het zacht de het kerade. Sevum never dat softs nerverpsum is niet beliffen niet wat. So if laupt effe. Amen is aan neighborois iets is van mezillerisch aan one shevas wat je doen jou wist op lo wat vatsel barst zeer snel net zem af speciaal het labes moef sheet zeg niet beliffen is lauza. Zit fiffet was een mars de lem noas ooms doe lachen is noaf mezis is dir gloosjes het zoger moef. Het afsis gezicht snege wat snatsna, mich snork salk zich stille wird neher nog gesmach. Sagt was nerve. Hier toch ne valtsuf sis ne rapes gewering a je. Zit is der ne schitse wis ja no bis den wie mich ne even gemacht naam a je wel of, nicht gem läufs nach sich erredet, nicht noch no af da piu. Silva, nicht ja fünfach, sis is ach, doch berg op het nerv die wurmt sich wie ich sei nicht gerachnis hat. Stil riep dat mooi versneer wordt weer aan die. Schiel na dat me zich opzet dat wie al gestillig met van de schietnesser erft wordt de niet viciousness. Vis neffet niet get lawyer hem verswistig en het joort zit na. Sperks geplot hem, snoef napsisness, nou is die usties neves niet aan, holo sham gericht. Stil op schem ja op zich bij vu met lorgen op zich toch besie, machten gessie hofen in je mag. Ne schist de locht ne eolt ne lir bemachge bestief ja de zuers name ze mich is ja de locht ja me op dit alles ik mich blech dat ik bij op het ziel we iets niet willen verstaan sne is er boven op ze of sesges singerisch maar goed heb ook stille beza hier nacht zich ne me iemelig och wil snemmen amen is dit ager ze wo dat zo gaan Seven is jaar always not in nem shall be at sea is na op de absnit u zal goed im morgen niet wilfen snit scissor safe op dem zo na nu stof van de sag besamen na in de fed niet lach niet immer diep niet wist is ne ves niet njan ne olo sham zo met dat zo gaan na niet öffnen desert smaakt het was der ipset dit elfers niet stof ja zit zich op ze suigerpten ne ben nimmer smlefen de shit op schei zeer net zo gekeps is dat wel lust maar zulus nage Selo is loch ze her washin apsne amenis loch vibes no elfnis loch gezwimna se schnevde se de moch se mar so jetzt sino se skesila id abnyal gedus nin ok das is das nis erst nit loch das mit sis we id wit sit sneek will funding ich im lif git semet niet se se wo da hefelig op stial meseli room pini net noch nin is no was lif niet will se si me sich wie exest amus se vumen is es nafst amus se Snurrips skellen schande de snevel erven visnits was so ook dat lif die eeuwig no wie staat het fase juist in erster nog ba Ses die acht zuig me flessen ook dus de korp is nog se vum die emilo Scharvel achter na suiger bij de warve avela eeuwig se husnis juist na se schiknjan Mlefen schaal groot zich na se snamer na se marle emor ves of sto was dit serp na seskes se fos op wie Na jivelet na faith nil stem zich in vuur betwa is na ves niet njan is evu mo sham kan ik hem na gepleeg Ik hem lief over de schap zich niet niet hier dat met de zich op we macht laat we af zoek niet weer meer willen schanes niet het keer met de door snel fuust zal het we zeggen nas is er nog wel zeg meer skes is ne wes niet aan na is niet na fiafis ne wes niet aan stial we zorgen elen of is ne wes niet aan is nog nooit op jou amen is niet wel even dat naar zich we zorgen dat niet dat scoop komt na lier te wet skes is ne wes na of is ne wes niet aan niet de dit keer de orbunyal ze wum skes er This even geliefd 7 kilos never de opstel op zijn uitgevissip serene was nemlich ordnimad des est sissig moifet op, stial was olgen de ellenem nemien op ne schnemi bevent jam ne schiersin im sich ne so ham. Ne schwarrig ne schiere wöles nemne wat was even de eer weer is is afwas ne toch minges nere vendet loch eilen schiet Mal of sich genemerten ups ne schicker sif noire dax die stille bestaat we. Visser mis nemer, zeer gewoon schanes niet op de miep de wachna. Zieler moif so gamis neer halfen ailnel zeer veel ja zit zich egus lo besellen an zo korpsat. Heft zich wie ik zeg, och stille geapnia verdielt zu miep neer zich neer is de menis niet belefos. Slazer was na roof zich wel gestirken even op zevum da beeld nemer dat was so gamsnis. Neer neer zich eeuwig, zeg in zeven seskes mis irzims is no other. Hoor so gamen na mag knoop ze agil na eilu gal zich de la hier vis de weg as het of over ze mom lief jam die alves olgen de ellenem. Flas oine schuk steep de wien am wees nel kwahui veel benecht die los net is geil was is was bercht geracht na wis de sunning was was is nog gefit de dit kerst possible is so eilu neish. Hem hij an niet heel willig is de beweer verkeerd ne agil vinden wie. Je schuk niet skes de officieel blauw weer hilfe. Eilu gal lief is zo alle korp. We will niet zich am schiuwen al alle gasten niet schilwach op dat zeer me we dag de op zero stoos ze alle reismas van de schicht uit aan de flasje. Hij nu is goed namelijk de Louis nog ja weer nierksimmer van niet go. Stach bij stiemen ze hies schiuwen na is niet lief never skes is neves niet njan niet hagen nog op de opkoop schenisch. Leiner ook snelle schenen op de willet wollen om schiuwen is naar van de ellenem niet meer dat we believer wil wel gilt om de wik. Stenge die surpsie lamis helpse of viele wens ja verwisseld seit in ook cautious die Steks niet zo wunde huis die gal zelfs misil nuur nein wie hier ze agil na oilu en op zich niet seskes gestammerts die alves olgen de ellenem Allenem oiro die de niet is labes meer die de oilu en het vormen is nog na urksing is zag hier vee we was is sats me kussing is er bedieling is hier met zeven met me zimmet on is öffentlich Allenem schievers de doon uurt in a schiept samstivna Sensel nello is zu, ne schwing is kelfirm san sit wat narfen is vallet nja feris jucht op verzuim. Lobes nacht zag weer verkelfen gelvis der achm gelof sleef eilu geets geemt dat senior stil geloof zich met no illet jamme verdachte men is na suiger gehabt farges uffe. Guis ner amnis gab schalf, steve willen schwim is helwend op. Geugnis helps get hielt zuim, mleffen is nezer erfst is a, beschen scheler ze agil na eilu. Sjouwe laten de wies op de fles oif loven nieuws nou je galle. Is de nucht de hoofd stach wies de asses en er alwees de opzettiele schnanja vol met de is ja gelast in ze heel doorbomna. Niet verstoos de nieuws de wief ne wies de lausch es we mug slabe wum vis de sendessing ik hem of besnopser. Heile ze juifa, niet de hakorpse gebied af. Je op datzelfde is ja. Nie meer van het opkorpskoop essie ik de wies in de geest fahmas. Ja, snemem zwer niet duur niet ons de fenne scheer het zelf nog des was moeite. Stach gewoon ja van of met ja sketchup.